Is there a motion to accept these minutes? So moved. It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Thank you. You have an agenda that has been passed out. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda at this time? With that, the agenda will be set aside and we'll start going to projects and hearing discussion about projects. So first are agency projects. We have the Department of Administration first. Matt, how are you? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good. It's nice to see other faces other than my wife and kids for a change, so appreciate you guys having this meeting. It's no slight on them. Matt Kent, Department of Administration. Department of Administration is requesting its annual appropriation for R&R dollars to IFA managed facilities. These facilities that are listed on your agenda were all originally bonded through the IFA, and part of that original bond payment was a capital R&R payment that was basically part of the bond. Now that those bonds have been defeased, we continue to make these payments to IFA so they can manage these facilities and keep them in the conditions that they're in. The facilities there are listed on the agenda: Government Center North, Government Center South, the Government Center parking garages, the Forensic Lab, Indiana State Museum, and Rockville and Pendleton Juvenile Correctional Facility. Like I said, this is an annual request, so I come before you folks every year and make this request. Are there any questions on that?
Any questions for Mr. Kent? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Department of Natural Resources, Mr. Smith.
Good morning, everyone, and it is nice to see other people's faces. DNR is requesting $1.5 million for partial funding of its July 1st bond payment that totals approximately $3.3 million. Under normal circumstances, this payment would be split between State Park Inns and State Parks Operating Fund. Due to COVID-19, the inns were closed for over 2 months, resulting in over $3 million in lost revenue. Because of this loss of revenue, the inns cannot support their portion of the payment. This allocation will assist in this effort. Examples of projects that have been completed with bonds: Abe Martin Lodge, the Aquatic Center, and 6 duplex cabin suites, Turkey Run Inn additions, Potawatomi Inn additions, that's up in Steuben County, Whitewater State Park cabins on Brookville Reservoir, Harmony State Park cabins, that's down around Evansville, Prophetstown State Park Aquatic Center, and Clifty Inn additions in Madison, Indiana.
Thank you. Are we seeing uptick in attendance now that the parks have opened back up?
Absolutely. Beginning in Memorial Day, every weekend has been a holiday weekend experience at our state parks. Okay. Campground occupancy is almost 100% every weekend. It's a good problem to have.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, the Maumee River Basin Commission, Mr. Breckenberger.
The thing about these masks is they grab a hold of your hearing aids, so bear with me just 1 second here. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity, and members of the State Budget Committee to appear before you, particularly in these times of, I guess, times that we've never navigated in the past. I'm Rod Rinkenberger, the Executive Director of the Maumee River Basin Commission. The Maumee River Basin Commission is requesting the release of $244,134 in Build Indiana funds, and I believe those were 2017 Build Indiana funds, to leverage $1,025,954 in FEMA disaster mitigation grant funds and US EPA's Clean Water Act Section 319 grant program funds, as well as another $174,484 in local match funds for 2 flood mitigation acquisition projects in the cities of Decatur and Fort Wayne, a stream assessment study on the St. Joseph River in DeKalb and Allen counties, and a flood insurance study update on Fish Creek in the town of Hamilton. The Decatur project totals $880,040 and will allow us to purchase an additional 9 homes and remove them from the St. Mary's River Special Flood Hazard Area. The properties are returned to open green space with a federal deed restriction that they must remain that open green space in perpetuity. These are permanent solutions. The Fort Wayne project totals $463,232 and will allow us to purchase 7 homes and remove them from the St. Mary's River Special Flood Hazard Area. And like the Decatur project, these properties also will be faced with the permanent deed restriction in perpetuity. That way we're permanently protecting that area. No structures can ever be built upon them. We will never be back here asking to acquire a property built on those same lands. The Fish Creek Flood Insurance Study update in the town of Hamilton. The Maumee River Basin Commission is a cooperating technical committee partner with FEMA, and by having that designation, it allows us to do floodplain mapping and make map corrections. And yes, there are many corrections that need to be made with FEMA maps. And in the town of Hamilton is one of those. The current maps are impacting their industrial park. Because of floodplain regulations, they're not allowed to convey those their industrial park lots. This study is going to shrink or narrow the footprint of the floodplain delineation, and it'll remove it to where they can go ahead and market those industrial park properties. And in addition to that, there's a couple downtown businesses that are being adversely impacted, and by shrinking that footprint of the floodplain, it will remove the mandatory flood insurance requirement from those businesses, all from a positive economic standpoint. And then lastly, the St. Joseph River Stream Assessment Study. If you'll remember back the last time I appeared, we were asking for funds to do a similar assessment study on the St. Mary's River. These are to determine dissolved reactive phosphorus and fluvial erosion issues and identify best management practices to improve the water quality in the Indiana's portion of the Maumee River Basin Commission. Ohio likes to point the finger at Indiana. We receive our water from Ohio coming in through Grand Lake St. Mary's up through the St. Mary's River as it heads north into Fort Wayne. We also receive our water in the St. Joseph River commencing up in the headwaters in Michigan, traveling in a southeasterly direction into Ohio, and then it turns back and comes southwesterly into Indiana, back into Fort Wayne, where the St. Joseph and St. Mary's form the headwaters of the Maumee, which then we turn around and send it back to our friendly state of Ohio. They seem to think that Indiana is degrading the water quality. We take issue with that, and these stream assessments are vital to establish our baselines at the Indiana-Ohio state line so that we can prove that we are actually improving that water quality. These 4 projects for the $244,134 that we are asking release of will allow us to leverage a total of $1.2 million, and that would be the federal and local matches combined. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions about the acquisitions of the home.
Yeah.
Did those acquisitions actually go through a process of eminent domain?
Absolutely not. Excellent question. All of the FEMA programs are 100% voluntary. They're voluntary on both parties, the community to begin with, and then secondarily, the participants. We actually have each participant, they have to sign a notice of voluntary interest. And on that notice of voluntary interest, it specifically states that this is not a condemnation. It's not an act of eminent domain. It's truly a voluntary process. And they can actually say that they want to participate, and up to the day of closing, they can back out. They go their way and we go ours. We have to be respectful of that.
It sounds like a lot of money to pay for, and I don't know what these houses consist of, but you said $800,000 to buy 9 houses, then you had another $463,000 for 7 homes. Are these, I mean, that just sounds, are these residential properties that people actually live in, or are these vacation homes?
Yes, sir. Yes, these are all residential properties.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The Maumee River Basin Commission, we established criteria as part of the state mandate to have a basin-wide master plan. And in that, we wanted to focus specifically on owner-occupied residential as our primary focus. Sometimes we get into rental properties, but again, it's all residential.
Okay. You talked about the actual benefits to the industrial park and the other businesses in the area. Was there any contribution locally?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
It was $6,575, which I want to credit, the legislature, which I would like to think that I had a part in this, because we have consistently leveraged our money. We've tried to be a very sound fiduciary of state monies. And, we were encouraging the requirement of a local match. And so this meets that 25% local match that we're required to secure.
Okay, so that was gonna be my next question. So locals had to participate in percentage, 25%.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we go to item number 4, Department of Transportation, Mr. Hargis.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your time today. My name is Ryan Hargis with the Indiana Department of Transportation. Today, for your consideration, we would like to request $846,050 from FY21 funding for 13 repair and replacement facilities projects across the state. These 13 projects have been deemed high priority by our district teams and constitutes roughly half of our repair and replacement projects for FY21. Most of this request consists of roof replacements. These include the Fowler Unit, Elkhart Salt Dome, Gary Salt Dome, Madairyville Unit, Pintown Salt Dome, Columbus Salt Dome, Lawrenceburg Pump House, Chandler Salt Dome, and the Poseyville Salt Dome. So in addition, with these high priority projects, we have the Greenfield District Admin Building Boiler Replacement, which is replacing a 30-year-old unit that has required multiple repairs over the last year and has reached the end of its life cycle. We have the Bainbridge Unit and Lafayette Unit secondary containment structure replacements. These are replacing old undersized structures, and they are showing signs of wear and tear and damage. And finally, we have the Indianapolis Subdistrict Brine System replacement. It's a poorly functioning unit and has reached the end of its life cycle as well. So again, the request is $846,050. Thank you for your consideration.
Questions for Mr. Hargis? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, These projects that you have, did you let them out for bid?
Not yet, but they will be. The specs will be written and issued for bid, yes,
Okay,
in the
so
coming
what-
fiscal year.
Once that happens, do you have a list of individuals that can do this work that you will let those bids out to?
We will follow IDOA Public Works bid process, but we do similar projects like this regularly, and you know, there are contractors that do these projects, for sure.
Okay, and you know the other questions coming. In regards to minority participation, MBE, WBE, veteran-owned businesses, and people with disabilities, is that in the equation?
We utilize the Public Works bid process, and I believe that is taken into consideration in their bid process.
Are you gonna meet the quota of, what, 15, 8, and 3, or something like that?
I believe we would make every opportunity to follow that bid process, so if that's required in there, we would, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like, in the future, upon this project being done, I'd like to report back to us in regards to what they did through Department of Administration, how they went through the process, and what were the results of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Porter. Any further questions? Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hargis. I have a quick question about the incinerator. Can you tell me what NDOT incinerates?
So it's actually a roadkill incinerator, and that's not on this list. That's the.
I'm sorry I asked. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
I know over the years we've been replacing some of the salt domes with the rectangular structures, just the loading and the size and everything helps a lot. Are you guys tearing down the older domes whenever you, the actual domes, whenever you vacate those and use them, or just, I was a little surprised as far as the roofing the domes. I just assumed we were tearing those down. Are you guys still using those for storage of other things, or?
Well, we use them where they're operationally necessary for a site, and it could be many years before we actually replace a unit site or the salt structure that's associated with it. So we do in some cases tear those down if appropriate.
But in some instances, whenever you are building a new salt structure, you are still keeping the old dome for other purposes?
Yes, if operationally it's required, we would, yes. Thanks.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Department of Revenue, Mr. Gully and Mr. Vance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Again, my name is Ed Vance. I'm the CFO for the Department of Revenue, and I am joined by Kevin Gully, who is our CIO and project manager for Project Next Door, which is our integrated tax system modernization project. We want to thank you for this opportunity to present our request for funding for our FY19 appropriation of $21.4 million. These funds will go towards implementing Rollout 3 of this project. Rollout 3 consists of 14 tax types, and it's anchored by the major tax type of individual. To date, since we were last with you, we have rolled out launched Rollout 1 of the project. It consists of 8 tax types, and it's anchored by the major tax type of corporate. That was launched last Labor Day, and it was on time and on budget and very successful. So it got our project started off on a really great footing. And it's one of the smaller rollouts of the project, but it permitted us to sort of get up to speed with the methodology of our implementation partner, which is FAST. They've been an excellent partner, but it helped us to sort of understand their methodology, their approach, and also to take time to understand the system functionality, and that'll serve us well as we move forward with the project. Currently, we are in the midst of Rollout 2. Rollout 2 consists of 13 tax types, and it's anchored by the major tax types sales and withholding. And this is our biggest rollout in terms of number of revenue. It represents about 75% of the revenue that the Department of Revenue collects on behalf of the state. So this is an enormously complex and a very involved rollout, and we're doing it in the midst of a pandemic. And as you're aware, with all of state agencies, folks have been working remotely. That was a concern for us initially going into this phase, but folks have performed extremely well. Productivity is off the charts in spite of the difficulty and challenges of this particular rollout. So we couldn't be more pleased in where we're at. And this rollout will launch on Labor Day. And we are on schedule to meet that target date. So we're very excited about that. To date, the project cost, I should say, first of all, we anticipate that the project cost will total $93 million. And that's what we've been sharing from the very beginning of this project. So $93 million, and that is for the implementation of the project itself. Now, that continues below the actual feasibility study, estimated cost for implementation, which was $100 million. So we're continuing to manage this project in a very fiscal, responsible way. And with respect to where we are with appropriations that have been approved to this point, the project has been appropriated $74.7 million. We have been funded $53.3 million of that, and we have spent to date $40 million on this project. And over 70% of that has gone to pay our implementation partner, FAST, for their services. Now, between today and Labor Day, when Rollout 3 actually launches, we expect to spend another $6 million. $5.2 million of that will go to our implementation partner for their services. So I'll leave it at that for now. I want to call up Kevin, who will give a little bit more in-depth overview of the project.
Thanks for your time. Kevin Gully, Department of Revenue. I'll cover some ground that Ed covered. I'll answer any questions as well. First, I'll talk about the background of the project, just a touch. Current state, where are we at and how are we doing? And then answer any questions accordingly. As Ed referenced, our partner is Fast Enterprises. The project started September 17th of 2018. The duration of it is 47 months. It is in 4 rollouts. Each rollout is roughly a year. The first rollout went September of 2019 to Labor Day. It included the corporate taxes and a few other taxes. The second rollout, which we're in the midst of right now and on time and on budget, is the trust taxes, which is sales, withholding, food and beverage, county innkeepers, et cetera. The third rollout includes the individual taxes and some gambling, wagering, and sports betting related taxes. And then the fourth rollout, which will be into 2021 or 22, will actually be the special taxes, cigarette taxes, OTP, other tobacco products, alcohol, et cetera. So that's the breakdown of the duration and each of the rollouts. As Ed referenced, the first rollout was on time and on budget. We went last September. Labor Day 2019 with the corporate taxes. Some of the benefits we're already seeing there are some of the additional electronic filing benefits on the corporate tax side, the amended side, and some of the benefits of the 2 products we get out of this. The integrated tax system, which is our tax administration system that replaces our legacy 20-plus-year-old tax administration system, and our customer portal, which we call InTime. InTime is a customer portal. Think about your financial management or your bank website or portal. That's where we're moving to with each rollout with additional functionality. Once again, some of the benefits we saw in Rollout 1, the additional electronic filing of amended and corporate returns coupled with some of the functionality in that customer portal. In Rollout 2, we've been able to effectively manage this through the COVID challenge. We are on time, on budget, and right now we are in the testing and training phase of the project with cutover and migration targeted for Labor Day, 9/8 of 2020. As it relates to additional rollouts, our team is on plan. We're working remotely very effectively, and we see no issue with continuing not only hitting this target this Labor Day, but also with Rollout 3 as well. Do we have any questions?
Senator Brown.
Very much. It's good to hear you're on time and on budget. With respect to the fourth rollout, we've had conversations in the past about raising gas taxes and whether they're going to be administered at the pump or at the point of sale. And then also which is sort of out of your realm, last session we had discussions about beyond taxing cigarettes and or increasing it, but also about vaping and how we would tax that. Whatever we do in terms of where that tax is placed, is that something, since that is the last rollout, if I heard you correctly, is that something regardless? Is that going to affect implementation?
Well, it depends on the amount of the change, but right now we plan to implement all those special taxes on time and on budget. And if there is some legislative change associated with a new tax type or a modification, we would roll that in and see if we could assess it within the current budget or timeline or bring a change control item to you guys.
Does the implementation partner have someone, and will they continue to have someone embedded in the department?
Absolutely. The team right now from Vast Enterprises has roughly 45 individuals on site. That's one of the reasons we've been so effective through the COVID challenge and working remote, because they were on site and co-located with us for over a year and a half, and we had a successful rollout one. That built trust and relationships that enabled us to get through and stay on time and on budget through Rollout 2.
All right, thank you.
Do you think, long-term, is it with Rollout 2 or Rollout 3, will an individual be able to go online and look at this system related to their own personal tax?
Yes, they will. I mean, part of what will come with Rollout 3 is their ability to see functionality on the portal. We haven't broke down at a granular level what kind of functionality they'll see, but they'll be able to see their correspondence and items like that, yes.
So it'll be Rollout 3. It won't be till after Labor Day of this year.
It'll be Labor Day of next year,
Yeah, okay.
of 21.
Senator Taylor.
Question, we've spent over I think you said $53 million on implementation, right? On this project alone?
We've been funded 53 and we've spent 40 million to this point.
Okay, so we spent $40 million, and it looks like we're gonna spend another 21 million, or 21.4 million is what you're asking for in your fiscal budget from two. So, how's collections been for the Department of Revenue during this pandemic? Sales tax, other tax, income?
They've gone reasonably well. Obviously, we've deferred or delayed as a sort of a support to the community the filing of individual and corporate tax, right? We've deferred those payment and filing dates. But with regard to trust taxes that were not a part of that deferral, we've had to certainly exercise compliance in making sure that the community understands that those were not part of the deferral, that the expectation is that they will be paid.
Right.
And, year over year, they are obviously lower for obvious reasons due to the volume and businesses being closed down. But there's not a significant compliance issue or something that wouldn't comport with, the state that we're in.
Well, from the report that we're gonna actually have, it seems like there's a significant amount of taxes that are not being collected due to COVID. And I'm just wondering, is this 21.4 part of your fiscal request from the budget in 2021?
It is. That is the appropriation that we received in the previous biennium, so that's what we're requesting, and it's, again, based on our comprehensive plan for the project.
Right. So we're going to talk about this later, but we're going to see other individuals who had budgeted items, and they're going to be asked to they're actually gonna be lowered. Yours was not lowered. Am I correct in saying that?
That's my understanding to this point.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I just find it interesting that we're doing a technology rollout in the midst of this pandemic, which I think is efficient and is something we need to do, but we're going to ask some other people to take a cut, but this rollout hasn't been asked to do the same. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
I was just going to clarify that the expenditures that the Department of Revenue had for this project are all outside of their normal annual operating appropriations. All of these have been handled as kind of one-time projects, capital projects, and that's why it's coming to Budget Committee. The agreement that all capital projects over $250,000 come, but this was part of the 2019 budget in the budget bill as a capital project and the 2017 capital budget project before that.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I just want to.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What does that mean? Does that mean we can't slow down the implementation? If you, I guess what I'm really perplexed by is the projects that we see as a priority, and then the projects that we don't see as a priority. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Jackson, but we have the flexibility as a state to delay projects, even if they're contracted. We have the flexibility to change the budget and the budget priorities over time. And I'm just, again, I agree, even if we've allocated it and even if we've already contracted for it, there's going to be some ramifications later on for everybody. And I think asking from what I understand, every department has been asked to revert 15%, and that probably would include the Department of Revenue, but the fact that we're spending $21.4 million on a technology upgrade is interesting.
Ed, could you remind me, we started off this fiscal year with a 2% reserve.
That's correct.
And when we asked agencies, I sent out a memo on March 23rd asking agencies to maximize their reversions for this year. Can you remind me what you guys were able to get up to from 2% this year?
From 2% this year, we anticipate we'll triple that reversion to the state for fiscal 20. And then the commitment for the new cost savings measure and the reserve for 21 of 15%, we've advanced a plan that will meet that commitment as well. And the Department of Revenue has always met its commitments in this regard. We take very seriously fiscal management, cost control, and we are truly spending on just essential items in the spirit of the cost savings measures.
Could you also remind me what the 6% is worth for this year and what the 15% is approximately worth for next year?
The 15% is about 10.5 million, 10.2 million. And then the 6% would get us up to about $5 million.
We use that for whatever we want, those reversions that you're talking about.
I mean, the intent would be to revert those to the general fund.
Which can then be used to do what?
I mean, so we started off this fiscal year with 2.3 billion in the general fund. We're going to miss revenue forecasts for this year. We've missed by 1.2 billion so far.
Right.
We'll probably miss by another 500, 600 million for
Right.
the month of July. And so essentially, those will be going back to the general fund to make sure that the general fund does not run out of money.
Right. Okay. I thought we had a reserve before we even got to that situation, but we'll get to that next.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indiana State Fair Commission, Mr. Fluttenberger or Ms. Hoy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Peffenberger. I'm the Vice President, Chief Financial Officer with the State Fair Commission. I'm joined today by our Executive Director, Cindy Hoy. We're here today to request the release of $2.313 million in funding to replace the approximately 94,000 square foot roof of the Indiana Farmers Coliseum. The current roof is experiencing leaks, leading to growing safety hazards and event disruptions as the roof deteriorates. The roof has reached its lifespan of 30 years and needs to be replaced. The proposed project will replace the roof membrane, the lead-coated copper panels with an EPDM rubber roof. The project will ensure continuity of events at the Indiana Farmers Coliseum as a critical revenue generator for the State Fair Commission. The new roof also comes with a 30-year warranty. So we respectfully request your approval of the release of these necessary funds to complete the project at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Will it interfere with scheduling people within the Coliseum, do you see, as you replace this?
It will not. We will be able to continue with our regular event schedule while the roof is being repaired.
Okay. Further questions? Representative Porter.
Been let, or is this just a budget? You already have the company?
Yes, we have bid out the project in March.
Okay, and what's the name of the company? Do you know?
I do not have the name of the company on me right now.
And so when that was let out, were there any considerations of full participation?
Yes, sir. So we posted the bid through the Department of Administration's website to try to solicit MWBE participation. We also partnered with the Indianapolis Minority and Women's Business Organization and posted through their website to utilize their database for the contractors as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You guys had a project, correct me if I'm wrong, that was supposed to build a new structure at the State Fairground?
That's correct.
And what's the status of that project?
We were told to pause the project at this time.
And how much in the annual budget was the state of Indiana to provide for the construction of that facility?
The project cost was going to be $50 million.
But how much on a yearly basis was the state budget supposed to provide for that?
$3.5 million was the lease payment.
So $3.5 million that you would have used in this budget cycle, and I'm assuming this is based on the lack of revenue that has come in to the state of Indiana. You were asked to pause the project?
We were asked to pause the project.
Okay. And do you anticipate the cost of that project to go up as you delay it?
It's hard to determine at this time, given the current market.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the reason why I bring this up respectfully is, again, we just heard, I believe it was Department of Revenue just reverted back over $15 million to the general fund. We have other departments that are going to be also doing the same thing. And we have a project that is a state-funded project that required a $3 million a year payment, and we've been asked to pause that. I don't know where the priorities are, and I get it. Don't get me wrong. Everyone should be looking at delaying projects, but we're going to have a list of projects come up later that we're still going to fund. And I don't know. This is, and please understand, this is in my district. The facility was going to provide a lot of economic development in the area, and it's going to be delayed for $3 million a year. So I don't know why we did that, but that's the sign of the times, I guess. But we're spending $21 million to upgrade our technology system so people can go online and pay their taxes.
Thank you. I think one of the things you see the Department of Revenue's in the middle, 3/4 of a way through with their project, and it's harder to stop that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes agency projects. Next, we go to university projects, and we'll hit Purdue University. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Susan Brock-Williams, Director of Government Relations for Purdue University. We have two projects today on the agenda. The first is our Bands and Orchestra building. It's a 37,500 square foot building. It's going to be located in the heart of our Student Success Corridor. We're very excited about it. It will house our 1,200 roughly students. We'll have shared academic space, rehearsal space. Student and band orchestra members will be able to practice, study. We'll have administrative offices for faculty and staff also. Our admissions folks are very happy about this building because many of our STEM students want to participate in bands and orchestra. In fact, about 70% of our bands and orchestra students today are STEM students. They have a higher GPA than the rest of the campus as a whole. This is a $20 million project. Happy to tell you that it's fully funded through gift funds. We have identified and announced the $10 million donor for this project. The building will be named the Mark and Sharon Hagel Hall. We're very pleased to have their generosity on this project. We'll be using the CMC method of delivery on this project, and we hope to go to bid July of 2020.
Questions? Next, go ahead.
The other project is the Spire at Discovery Park project. So this looks familiar to you perhaps because we had a similar lease agreement last year for enrollment of students. This one will be for 256 beds for student housing and 4 beds for residential assistance. This will be a little bit different than last year in that all of the apartments will be located in the same location, so it will be providing more of a dorm-like experience. So we, at this point, our enrollments are record-breaking again. We don't know for sure what will be happening for fall until early July, but we also need this space because we're in the process of de-densifying campus, where we're taking offline several dual occupancy dorm rooms to make them single occupancy in order to provide the social distancing necessary. So this will come in very handy at a really crucial time for us. The total lease is 9 months. It's a little over $2 million, $268. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
And who are you leasing from?
This is the Balfour Beatty Walsh Housing LLC. It's a PRF-owned project.
Okay.
And it's right next to campus, so it's a good space.
And about how old is this building?
Oh, gosh, this opened up, I want to say, 2 to 3 years ago.
Okay.
It's very new.
Senator Italian.
I just want to take this opportunity to ask you about what you expect for enrollment. You know, we're hearing all kinds of rumors and stories and that kids may not come back, or kids may sit out a session, or that the foreign students, and you have a lot of them at Purdue, may not get visas. What is your expectation on enrollments for this fall?
Well, like I noted, we, at this point, based on everything that's happened to this point, our enrollments are record-breaking. So the more than we've had in any other year. That's good. But now that we're rolling out what's going to be happening in the fall in terms of choices, you can come to campus and live on campus and take your courses in classroom with a blend of class and online, or you can stay home and take your online classes, or you could sit out and take a gap year. We just don't know until early July timeframe. That's the deadline we've given students to tell us their intentions.
Okay, so when you say enrollments at record levels, you're talking about
Yeah, so
applications
yes,
of,
applications
yeah.
and paying the fee and, you know, going toward all of the steps that it would be to take to become a student in the fall.
So, and I'm just asking in the context of this, how do you know you're going to need all these extra beds? I mean, how
yeah.
do you know that?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a mathematical problem, and we're pretty good at that at Purdue, of course. So we had to take off about 850 or so dorm rooms to make them single occupancy. So these are our smaller dorm rooms on campus that my son was in one, for example. It's almost that corner over there with 2 people. So that will become a single occupancy now. So these apartments will allow us then to take some of those students who would be in one of those rooms as a double into these locations. So we do definitely need these this year especially. And if students continue with their intentions to come to campus this fall, we'll definitely need it.
All right, and just, you know, you're saying beginning of July, you should know
Yeah, July 6th is the date.
what your actual enrollment's going to be and what that's going to look like?
Yes, the international student population is a totally different animal at this point. We just don't know. Some of the students have stayed in country, some have gone back. In order to get back is going to be pretty difficult. So we're offering them some online options as well. So the pricing model will be different, I think, for those kinds of students who decide to just do everything online versus coming to campus and sitting in a classroom and doing the blended approach.
Okay, and so last question, just at what point between now and September do you think you could give us a report on what your, you know, based on your answers in July, based on that, can you give us an actual report on what your finances are going to look like?
Oh, finances or
Well, I mean,
enrollment?
on what your student population is going to be and what the tuition, you know, revenue is going to be.
I can't speak for the staff that runs those numbers, but I can get back to you and let you know probably by the end of July, mid-July. We should know numbers.
I think that all of us would sort of like to have a picture of what's going on
Sure.
at the different universities to let us know, well, we've got something coming up, so
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
know these things. Thank you.
I can assure you that a lot of people have been hard at work on our campus and all the campuses in Indiana, trying to make everything as safe as possible for the fall.
Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Susan, I don't know if you know the answer to these questions, but if you don't, please, I'd like to get them as soon as possible. We did the same thing that we're doing for Purdue, we did for Indiana University last year. And one of the things that really perplexed me is how they came up with the actual apartment complex to actually house these students. I know it's geographically beneficial to the students, but from what I understand, this project was built about 2 years ago, and it was the private sector purchase of the property. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
And they did all the renovations prior to you needing these rooms, am I correct?
Yes.
So they got all their financing, they did everything they did, and students were living in this. As a matter of fact, I heard it was somewhere around 98% occupancy prior to what you're doing today. Am I correct?
I don't know that number,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, the math that I do, simple math, says it's gonna be about $8,000 a year that you're gonna pay for each unit.
Okay.
Now, is that by bed? Because, for example, in Bloomington, an apartment with 2 bedrooms and 2 students, they're renting by bed. So, for example, if you pay $800 for one student and $800 for another student, that's $1,600 a month for rent,
Right.
which is pretty high. I mean, well,
Yeah.
let me say this, high relative when I was down in Bloomington, but, and I expect prices to go up. But what are you paying per student? Are you paying by bed or are you paying by unit?
I think by bed. The rates for this particular apartment for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, for example, is $9,500. And then it goes on down from there. But the thing about housing at Purdue, there's so many different choices. This
Right.
is in the range based on amenities, access to campus, that sort of thing. It's not that we're paying more for the market rate, for sure.
No, I don't expect you to, but the $9,500 that you're talking about is per bed.
Academic year, per person, yes.
So if it's a 2-bedroom, then you're actually paying $18,000,
Well, 1,000?
because that's per bed. You got 2 bedrooms, 2 beds,
Yes, yes.
9,500, okay. And that is because of your need, or because that's where is it gonna be freshmen?
No, these are typically upperclassmen. We try to keep the freshmen on the traditional campus dorm situation so that there's better retention from freshman to sophomore year. So these are people who want to pay this. I mean, we're not forcing anyone to go. There's a portal the students go to, and they fill out their information and what they want to pay and what amenities they want to have. So
But
that's how it's
aren't we
selected.
paying for this?
Yeah,
Aren't we-
these are paid out of auxiliary funds.
Oh,
yes.
okay, from the university?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
So
Yes.
these are auxiliary funds, and the reason you're here is because you want to use these auxiliary funds to pay
Yeah,
and that would be from the university.
right.
What does the student pay?
Well, the student pays their portion, so we,
So you're paying 19,000, and the student pays on top of that?
I don't know the exact breakdown, but there's a combination
Okay.
of the two.
That's pretty good. Whoever, how did you bid that? Did this go through choosing this place? Did it go through a bid process?
Well, it might have the first year, this is the second year of this
Yeah.
lease with this
So this would
particular.
be okay. All right, thank you. All right.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Ball State University, Ms. Poltz-Rice.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Becca Poltz-Rice with Ball State University, and it's my pleasure to come before you today to ask for authorization to move forward with our STEM and Health Professions Phase 3 project. It is our third and final phase of the STEM and Health Professions facilities, and as you may recall, in the 2015 budget, the first phase, our Health Professions building, was built, and this past fall, students moved in. The second phase will open in fall 2021 and is our Foundational Sciences building. And this remaining phase will house all of our other sciences that are not hard sciences or health professions, so geology, geography, physics, and natural resources and environmental management. It is the Cooper Science Building. It will be a partial demolition and partial rehabilitation of the nearly 300,000 square feet of the building, which was built in the mid-1960s. The building is, at the time, was built in 3 phases and was a good building for its purpose, but at the present time, the systems are failing, and whether it's electrical or safety because of the labs or those sorts of things, it is time for some real rehabilitation of the building. And so we are looking forward to demolishing 45% of that building, approximately 130,000 square feet. The remainder, 161,000 square feet, will undergo the renovation. And so we will do things like replacing mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire alarms, safety equipment, as well as the information technology systems, and also installation of a fire sprinkler system and accessibility and those sorts of things. It will bring down the operational costs of the building by approximately $1 million, which is a good thing as well. And so we are looking forward to that. And so with that, happy to take any questions.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it for the university projects. We'll start with the review items. Mr. Jackson, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 review items, and I'll handle them separately, but I just want to start with some, kind of going back to my remarks from earlier, just as far as the status of the general fund, if you will. As I think you're all aware, with the the pandemic and the impact on revenues for this year, in the month of April, we missed our revenue target by almost $1 billion. And then in the month of May, we missed by $233 million, bringing our miss this year so far to about $1.2 billion. We're working off of internal estimates right now based, trying to forecast where we'll land this year as well as next year. And I would expect us to miss by several hundred million this month again. $500-600 million is our best estimate right now. I don't expect it to be too far off of that, but at this point, with delayed payments, things like that, I'm not exactly sure where we'll land. We're expecting similar misses next year, and so far the budget agency has been, again, based upon internal estimates, we're expecting that we'll miss this biennium miss our forecast somewhere in the ballpark of $3 to $4 billion. I think we're planning on doing a new revenue forecast for the September Budget Committee meeting, but until then, we're just basing kind of our planning and decisions off of internal forecast. But I very much look forward to that consensus forecast that we'll have, and we can all kind of tie our surplus statements and everything back to that come September or so. And again, let me just kind of put this in context. If we've missed by $1.2 billion so far, and our internal estimate is another $500 million-ish, that's $1.7 billion, and that's basically 10% of our annual budget. 10% of our annual revenues we're expecting to miss this fiscal year. Some of that will be made up for in next fiscal year. We're expecting that the shift of tax days probably pushes, I'll say, $800 million or so from this year to next. But whenever I was talking about missing by $3 to $4 billion for this biennium, that's assuming already that we make up that $800 million that we're next year that we're losing this year. Because of that situation, that's why you see these two requests on here for Budget Committee review. The first one is the Special Transportation Flexibility Fund. And so going back to when we redid how transportation was funded about 2 or 3 years ago, the decision was made at that time to start gradually shifting part of the sales tax on gas, also known as the gasoline usage tax, also known as GUT, to start shifting some of those dollars from the general fund to other places. And that's about a 5-year or so gradual shift. I think it was Senator Kinley, I think part of this was his idea in terms of holding back part of that in this special fund, Special Transportation Flexibility Fund, holding a portion of it in there, and then giving the administration the ability every 6 months or so to kind of review that and make a recommendation to Budget Committee as far as whether those dollars should go on to NDOT, to their state highway fund, or be pulled back to the general fund for purposes, and as the memo states, it has to be used for, there's, I think, 3 allowable purposes: K through 12 education, healthcare, or child services. What we're proposing to do is and so the first transfer happened back in January. Approximately $21 million was what it had accumulated in that first 6 months. Letting that go to the State Highway Fund is not something that requires Budget Committee review or involvement or anything like that, so we just let that happen. But in order to kind of intercede and claw those dollars back, that does require Budget Committee review. Right now, we're estimating that this would be worth approximately $13.5 billion at the end of the fiscal year, but we won't know that exact date until June 30th. But I don't expect it to be too different from that 13.5 number. The requirement, again, is that it has to be used for K through 12, healthcare, or child services. And I would just say, as I mentioned earlier, missing revenue forecast by 10% this year puts us in a situation where we need additional revenues to back our existing general fund appropriations. I would also say that while I don't have the exact number, we are going to need to augment the Department of Child Services appropriation this year by an amount of approximately 20 million, I think is the latest estimate. And so I can pretty easily connect those dots and say, yeah, we need more general fund money to either back the existing appropriations or to cover an augmentation that's going to be necessary for DCS. Just heads up, I mean, again, this is, we have the ability to bring this every 6 months. And so while this transfer just speaks to, for this past 6-month period ending on June 30th, there's a potential that we would be back again at like the December Budget Committee meeting and ask for another transfer at that time. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
And this does not necessarily take away from the transportation fund. It's just extra dollars that would have gone into the transportation fund. Is that correct?
They are not dollars that are already in the transportation fund, but they are dollars that would go to the transportation fund.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Zach, are we definitely going to have revenue forecasts in September?
If not sooner.
Okay.
But that's my understanding.
That's your understanding?
Yep.
So are we going to have a Medicaid forecast also?
Is it- Would you like a Medicaid forecast?
I would love to have a
Okay.
Medicaid forecast.
Okay. Let me work on that.
It's, yeah, it's was it, what, 18-20% of our budget, right?
Yeah, 2.2 billion of 17.5. So
Yeah, so I think it'd be fruitful.
Okay.
Enlightening transparency. Thank
Yep.
you.
Senator Mishler?
If I remember back a few years ago, that number, the sales tax on fuel, I think was right around 300 million, if I recall. And there was a big push at the time, roads, let's put all the money into roads. And I think Senator Kinley and I were the only two at the table that had a concern that the general fund couldn't take that hit all at one time. So we agreed on a 5-year, it's either 5 or 7-year phase in, I can't remember. And then we also said that at some point we're going to be backed into a corner where services are going to be more important than roads. So that's where the flexibility fund came from. So then we agreed, there was a lot of pushback, so then we agreed, well, what if we only made it for education, child services, and healthcare? So we find ourselves in that corner. And so as I look back, I think we did the right thing. Thank you.
Senator Talion?
Thank you. Yeah, Zach, I have a couple of questions about, are you using 700 or 800 million as the expected tax deferred amount? One of those numbers, something in there?
I'm using 800.
Okay.
I'm looking at Hari back in the back. Hari Razafindramanana is the director of our tax and revenue division. Do you have a number that's dramatically different from 800, Hari?
I want a number to land. I just want a number
So,
to keep
yeah,
talking about. Okay.
So we expected about 1.2 to 1.4 billion dollars of payments to be coming in this fiscal year.
Yeah.
Based on data that we have seen in April, May, and month to date in June, we do expect that there's a total of about 800 to 900 million dollars that would be potentially paid in July instead of fiscal year 2020.
Okay, so if we talk about 800 million, at least that's a number that, okay. So, we've got 800 million that we're not getting in 20, but that will, because it's moved into July, we'll be getting it next year. Now, does that mean a couple of things? First of all, does that mean that the 2021 revenue forecast is going to be 800 million more, just automatically more than expected?
So, I'll be as transparent as I can as far as what the numbers that I'm using. The placeholder numbers I've been working of until we get a new forecast have been that we would miss by about 1.7 billion for this year and about 2 billion for next year. That 2 billion already assumes a shift of 800 million from this year into next year. And so that miss for next year would have otherwise been larger had 800 million not already been shifted.
All right, so can you tell us what is the effect on our budget right now of the fact that we missed that, well, $1.2 billion?
So we started off the fiscal year with 2.3 billion in the general fund.
Right.
And that consisted, I mean, the way I always think about this, we have the general fund checking account that had 830 some million in it. And then the three other savings accounts, if you will, the Medicaid reserve, tuition reserve, and the rainy day fund. And I'd have to pull it up here. Those each had approximately 500 million in each of those. I think only one is really close to 500. Some are a little bit less, some are a little bit more, but on average, they have three, each of those three have about 500 million. At the end of, with missing by 1.2 billion, we have increased reversion targets for this year. I would expect
For 20.
For 20, I would expect that 800 million that's in the just the general fund part of it, not in the reserves, not in the savings accounts. I would expect that to be. I don't know for sure whether that will be negative at the end of the year, but it's probably going to be pretty close to about zero, if not negative, at the end of the year. Just the fact that we're missing by 1.2, but again, we'll have pretty high levels of reversions for this year. To the extent that does happen, we'll have to consider moving dollars out of those three reserve funds. With regards to the rainy day fund itself, there is a formula that we can follow. It's kind of this range of whether income grows or decreases by 2%. But then there's language that just allows the budget director to move money out of the rainy day fund to the general fund to prevent the general fund from going negative. And so that's something that we will probably, I can't say for sure, but we'll likely exercise this year during closeout if necessary. With regards to the other two, the Medicaid reserve and the tuition reserve, I don't think I have the authority to hold a reserve, to move money out of the tuition reserve fund to the general fund without budget committee review. And so that could be something you would see at some point next calendar year or next fiscal year. And again, what we would probably do is just say, hey, there's not enough revenue to back the tuition support appropriation, and so therefore we need to move money out of the Medicaid or out of the tuition reserve to make sure that we can fund the tuition support appropriation. Frankly, almost exactly the same scenario for Medicaid reserve in terms of, hey, we don't have enough money coming in to back the Medicaid appropriation, therefore we would need to move the Medicaid reserve into the general fund, but that is something I, as budget director, have the authority to do without coming to budget committee.
Oh, you can move that one?
Yep.
All right. And so, a couple more questions. So, the amount of, do you see the losses on the sales tax slowing down? I mean, we've had, it's my understanding, we've had like 100 million loss on sales tax for April and May. Do you see that is leveling off, the loss amount?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to Hari for a minute if I can.
So there are a few dynamics going on. In February, there was actually a little bit of weakness going into March. So the March data came in below our estimate for sales tax. Whenever we speak about sales tax, it's always important to note that there is the gasoline use tax as part of the sales and use tax number. And the gasoline use tax is really based on pump prices. So that tax rate is calculated every month. And as you know, crude oil prices and gasoline prices have plummeted with the shelter in place and all those store closures and restricted amount of transportation. So that has heavily impacted the sales tax. We are looking at about $300 million typically of gasoline use tax this fiscal year. That's what we're looking at. However, with the impact of on the pump prices, there's at least a $60 million impact just on gasoline use tax. And then the sales tax, we did see some kind of resilience. We dropped about 10 to 15% in April, and in May as well. Those numbers are around the 10% drop year over year. As of month to date, we don't know yet. We haven't yet received the data. However, when you look at the retail sales numbers all across the board, across the U.S., you do see some kind of rebound from the lows of April.
Okay, all right. And then one more final question. You said you're looking at $2 billion down for '21. Where, can you give me some idea of what that number means, where those numbers are?
And just to clarify, you mean in terms of what that, put that in context of the whole budget, or you mean in terms of like what revenues?
What revenues, yeah, if you're talking about down $2 billion from in '21, what revenues are you expecting to be down?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Hari here, but I think, so far this fiscal year, what we've seen is across the board, every revenue has underperformed its target. Hari, do you want to expand upon that?
Sure. So first and foremost, the payment delay from FY '20 to '21 is definitely going to affect the individual and corporate numbers. So you can't really see from that year-over-year change that the revenues will decrease. However, we do expect a decrease in just the taxable income all across the board for individual income tax as well as corporate tax. For sales tax, like I said, gasoline use tax is going to be very heavily impacted. You're looking at about $600 to $100 million drop year over year compared to forecasts. In terms of sales tax, the drop year over year in sales tax is about a little less than 3% drop year over year, expecting sales tax, compared to the December 19 forecast projecting a 3.1% increase. Riverboat and Racino, those will also be affected. We don't know yet at this time. It was really dependent on the reopening plan and the transition, but we do see there's going to be some weakness, probably at least over the next 30 days. And then all the other revenues will also be impacted in some way that would kind of be similar to the 2008, 2009 recession, at least for the next couple months. But we don't know yet in terms of the full year outlook. It will really depend on the shape of the recovery.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Taylor?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jackson, I have a few questions. Were you around in 2009?
I've been with the budget agency for 15 years. So.
Wow,
Yeah.
That's amazing. You don't even look
Since
like
I was 12, yeah.
All right. We've gone through this before, right?
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but during that year, there was a federal support of our loss of revenue, right?
There was federal support.
Okay.
And the reason I'm picking my words carefully is, I'm not sure if we can characterize it as to replace lost revenue. And I don't know if this is where you're going, but with this, with the federal assistance that's being provided during this pandemic and recession, most of those dollars cannot be used just to supplant
Right now.
revenue.
Right now.
Okay.
But we have a precedent for what we're going through right now, correct? And there's,
Some extent, yep.
okay. So I'm familiar with that as well as you are. And if I remember correctly, and through the great decision-making process of my colleague, Senator Ryan Mishler and Senator Kenley, they did do a lot of good things to make sure if this ever happened again, we could actually have resources. And this Transportation Flexibility Fund is one of them. My question to you is, when you say K through 12 education, wasn't K through 12, wasn't the loss of revenue for K through 12 a specific thing that was actually supported by the federal government during 2009?
I'm honestly not
Oh, okay.
sure.
Well, I'm sure these guys, I'm sure my colleagues know. Yes, it was in the budget. Okay, so I'm sure Chairman Brown knows, and so does Chairman Mishler. They actually supported our K through 12 funding. So the question I have for you relates back to what we're doing today. So correct me if I'm wrong, you're gonna take $13.6 million out of the road flexibility fund. You're gonna move it to K-12, and I have some questions about that. Healthcare or childcare?
Child support, yeah.
So how are you gonna allocate it between those three?
Well, again, what I'll say is, this will go into the general fund. Easiest thing I can tell you is that we're on track to need to augment DCS by, I literally have a emergency request in my inbox email right now to approve an augmentation for the Department of Child Services for approximately $20 million, above and beyond their fiscal 20 appropriation of 900-ish million. And so,
But they're part of the reversion too, right?
DCS will not be reverting anything this year.
Good question, okay.
Yep.
Thanks for your clarity. So
Yep.
you've got a $20 million request from DCS already on your table, the table.
For this, to close the books for this
To close
fiscal
the
year.
books. And then you've got $13.6 million that you're gonna use for all three, that you can use for all three.
Correct.
But you haven't decided how you're gonna use it.
Well, it's going into the general fund, which will be we'll be missing revenue forecast by at least 10%. And so, but yeah, if I can easily make the connection that we will need to provide DCS with $20 million more this year. And so if we want to say that this 13.6 is directly going towards that, I'm fine making that connection.
Right, which means then you could go to the K through 12 reserve and use those funds to close the gap on K through 12 fund.
Which gap on K through 12 funding?
Well, I'm assuming that's why you want to use it. Part of it's for K through 12, part of it's for health care, part of it's for child care. But we have a reserve, K through 12 reserve, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so you're gonna, I'm thinking fiscal responsibility here would say you use the reserve for K through 12, and then healthcare and child care is funded by $13.6 million. I don't know why is that your plan?
As I was mentioning earlier, we're not going to be moving any dollars out of the tuition reserve fund to the general fund this fiscal year. I think we'll probably need to during next fiscal year.
Yeah, okay. So when you say K through 12 education, what are you talking about? Are you talking about traditional public schools? Or are you talking about charter schools, voucher schools? Because here's the problem that I have if you give to either one of those other two, charters and vouchers. They actually received CARES money, didn't they?
I believe, well, and traditional schools did as well.
Traditional public schools did?
Yeah.
And they all received CARES money support from the federal government.
Yes.
I'm going to look back at Chris, but
Yes.
yeah, that's,
Yes, they
Okay.
got money related to kids on free and reduced lunch.
Which goes to my point, Mr. Chairman, and why I'm very confused about why we're not using our reserves. The two times that we've seen this happen, there has been federal assistance to help.
well, I'm sorry.
I didn't say it closed the gap, but it does help, right? The two times that we saw revenue go down and the things that we have to pay for out of the general fund, the federal government has stepped up and supported in some way.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I didn't make that connection earlier. We are using our reserves. It's going to take.
Great.
We have 2.3 billion in the bank. I'm assuming when we started the fiscal year, we had 2.3 million in the general fund combined reserves. I'm assuming that we will miss revenue forecast between $3 and $4 billion.
Right.
We will need to, in order to make things work, we will need to spend down those reserves. We will need to cut spending, and we will also need to use federal assistance as creatively as we legally can in order to make things work.
Right, and that's what my point is. I'm trying to make is we're making these decisions. Do you know what the federal government's their assistance is gonna be?
I mean, to date, I mean, we've received some assistance so far. There's discussion about more assistance,
Yeah.
but that's, I mean, we
Okay.
can't, I mean, we have to be proactive. We can't just kind of cross our fingers and hope that they take care of things. So far, we've received $2.5 billion. The OMB director, Chris Johnston, is going to talk later in the agenda about the dollars received and how that spending's been occurring so far.
Right, and I appreciate that, and you can't do that to fill that $2.4 billion, you can't use that to fill any gaps that you have in revenue. I do understand that. I just wanted to get on the record that sometimes we do things in a fiscally responsible manner, but we leave out the most important part, which is there's been assistance before. Now, I'm not saying that you can depend on the federal government to do anything, but I've sat through committee hearings and fiscal committee hearings where we always say you can't depend on the federal government. For some reason, they tend to come through. So I agree with you. I just want to make sure we're on the record that if we do get federal assistance and that the federal government does come through with some assistance, that we try to make sure that the departments that we're asking to revert money back to the general fund are fully funded at some level. I mean, there's services that are going to be cut because of these fiscally responsible maneuvers that we're making right now. And if the federal government steps in and fills some of those gaps, I think it would only be appropriate to give that money back to the department so that critical services can actually be implemented. And I'm just going on precedent and what we've seen in the past. So I appreciate what you're doing. Don't take this the wrong way. I just think that we're leaving out one critical part, which is we have a history. We know the federal government has stepped up in the past, and I expect, and I think we all should expect the federal government to step up again.
Senator Mishler.
Chairman. So of the 2.3 billion, there's 338 million of that is the tuition reserve that you're talking about, the savings account for K-12. So there's 338 million in there, which is accounted for in the 2.3 billion that Zach's talking in the total reserves.
I understand that, Mr. Senator Mishler, but that reserve could be used before we start transferring from other accounts. And that's all I'm saying. If you use that first, for which it was designed for, then maybe we don't have the kind of stuff that's going on that is gonna cut other services. And the $20 million request from DCS sounds, that's gonna be critical.
Okay. And second of all, Mr. Jackson, I believe that the governor at 2:30 today is going to talk about the K-12, what the intent is on the K-12 and spending for K-12. Am I correct?
That's right.
Okay.
You know, I think your point is, where does the money come from? I mean, we have had months, you know, March, April, and May, where money has come in less than our expenses. We're still writing checks. So those checks are still covered. Nothing's bounced. So that money has come out of reserves because we're writing the checks and they're not bouncing. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. Just a point of clarification, or as a quote-unquote get on the record. I was here a few years ago when we went through the number 44. The federal government did come by with stimulus money, and they did provide money for K-12 and Medicaid during that time. And then in 2010, which people have continued to not understand, or they kind of flush away or kind of put it up in the sky, that $300 million was taken out of K-12 education by Governor Daniels. And we always talk about we giving them more and more to K-12, but we were less $300 million. I just want to continue to keep that out there because that's true, that's factual. You can fact check that. McConnell was working at the federal level, is working on a way now that we can utilize that $2.4 billion that we have. And I think that decision is going to be tried to be made by the end of July. The other side of the Democrats and Pelosi have come up with a $500 billion package, which has not really gotten any legs at this point over in the Senate, but the 2.4 is there. It could be a way that we can address the gaps that we have in our budgets by December 31st of 2020.
Thank you. Zack, further? Okay.
Move on to.
Do you want to go on next to the state educational institutions?
Sure. Let me just start by saying with regards to this reserve on higher education, you know, we tried to do our best to make sure that universities have the same amount of funding available in FY21 as they did for this fiscal year, FY20. And admittedly, this is not perfect. We started off with, I'm just looking at the memo here, you know, universities make up again about 10% of our state budget. 1.7 billion is the annual appropriation for total appropriations for universities for FY21. That includes their operating appropriations, their fee replacement appropriations. That the fee replacement are those appropriations that go to pay for the debt that they've issued that the state's on the hook for other line items, line item appropriations, as well as R&R and other capital appropriations. That's 1.7 billion for next fiscal year. What we're proposing, or what I'm proposing, is holding a 7% reserve on the operating and line item appropriations for universities. That's a number of about 1.47 billion, and I'm saying let's hold a reserve on 7% reserve on that. When you subtract that out, that's a little over 103 million, and then add back in the CARES Act funding that each university is receiving. And let me just clarify that for a second. The dollars listed on this memo represent half of the CARES Act funding that the universities have received or are receiving. Half of that money has to be used I think for financial assistance, basically support for students. The other half is for the universities to retain. I know that there are restrictions on how those dollars have to be used, and I'm not pretending that, taking away a state dollar and then giving them back a CARES Act dollar is the perfect one-for-one comparison. But I just wanted to acknowledge that there are CARES Act dollars going to the universities. And so in the end, once you subtract out the reserve of 7%, add in the 50% of the CARES Act money that they are retaining, you get back to you get to $1,452,000,000, which is about $1 million off of the funding that the universities received from the state during fiscal 20. In this last column here, you can see how individual universities would fare in this scenario. Purdue is the university that would take the biggest hit in this situation, just in terms of their CARES Act dollars. They get fewer CARES Act dollars than what they would be losing in terms of the 7% reserve. Contrast that on the opposite end with Ivy Tech as an example, where the CARES Act money that they're getting exceeds the amount of the 7% reserve. But again, this $103 million, going back, I think, to I want to say the 2015 budget, there was a requirement inserted into the budget bill at that time, saying that the budget agency could not hold a reserve on universities without that being reviewed by budget committee. So that's why it's on the agenda here today. And I think I hit everything, but happy to handle any questions.
Zach, I have several questions on this because I really don't get how it is we're doing this. First of all, you're looking, what this looks like, and I know it's not a dollar for dollar, but we're holding back 7% and then saying, hey, you're getting it back from the feds under CARES. But how do we know whether any of the universities can use any of the CARES money at all? It's my understanding that it can't be for revenue loss. It can only be for direct COVID expenses. And so, I'm just going to take IU because it's the first one there. We're holding back 38, hoping they can get 30, but they may get 5 in reimbursable expenses. And so the idea that they're only going to take a small loss is really just a guess, isn't it?
I'd actually, I don't know if any of the universities would want to speak to this, but I believe they already have those dollars in hand from the
Well, I thought that they had to be used for specific expenses based on reimbursable, whatever's reimbursable. So, I would like to hear from any of the universities who have an answer to this, whether the money that they have is actual money that they can use, or whether it's just, maybe you can get reimbursed for something. Now, here's the other question that I have, because I have been shown this. It says maintenance of effort requirements applicable to CARES Act programs.
Yep.
Which means that we can't cut and let the CARES Act supplant. So how do we get around that?
Yeah. So that language, I think it's the very last, and I think I've emailed it to staff. That language, I think the very last sentence of that says that the MOE calculation is based upon a 3-year average. And I believe that 3-year average is 17, 18, and 19. If I'm wrong, that's a mistake, not intentional.
Okay.
It's a 3-year average of 17, 18, and 19, the funding that the state has provided. as you know, the state typically provides more funding every year. And so the 3-year average is, the state's providing more funding in
Yeah, I
before
get
this
what you're
reserve,
saying.
yeah,
If you do a 3-year average and we've got 2 or 3% growth each year, but are you gonna, is the 7% going to take care of that?
yeah, but before this, we made sure that we were not violating the CARES Act MOE provisions in terms of making sure that we weren't cutting.
More than the average amount?
Correct.
Okay, all right, okay. And then, so I don't, all right, and then this is my next question. I don't quite get how this chart works. So I'm looking, again, just IU because it's first. So you cut them 38, maybe they get back 30, and then you're saying the difference is $500,000. Why isn't it $8 million?
Yeah, it's the difference between the FY20 and the FY20 appropriation for each university. Each university was getting an increased amount already in the budget between 20 and 21.
Yeah?
And so 8
And
million
so- and
comes
so-
off of
So
that,
you're
but it's
getting
still.
rid of whatever increase they were gonna get.
Correct.
Right.
And then you're saying, once you get rid of that increase, so,
So the 7% reserve is off of the 21 amount, and the 21 amount was higher than the 20 amount.
what, by what, like 2%?
I want to say 1.5%, but I would need to, please don't hold me, I would need to double check that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so they're getting cut their raise, or the cost of living, the change, the change. They're getting cut that, plus this additional 7%.
They're getting cut from the 21 appropriation. So let's assume my 1.5% increase is right.
Yeah,
It might be a little bit off, but if they were getting, we're taking away the 1.5, if you will, and
Yep.
then the math isn't right, but another 5.5%
got it.
below their 20 appropriation. And again, the math does not work exactly like that.
Yeah.
But it's 7% off of their 21, which takes off, which puts them lower than what they would have gotten FY20. But then I'm acknowledging that there's CARES Act funding.
Okay, but, so what do we know about the CARES Act funding? And what do we know, I think that's key to whether, to whether this works, is that if they can't use that CARES Act money,
Yep.
then they're losing $38 million.
I'd have to ask the universities kind of their perspective on how they can use those dollars. I'll say that, again, we are losing, this year we missed our revenue we're gonna miss our revenue forecast by about 10%. And the higher ed portion of the budget is 1.7 billion, 10% of the budget, and that doesn't even include the few hundred million that goes to CHE for financial assist. I don't think it includes that amount, the financial assistance dollars. But I guess I would say, regardless of whether there was CARES Act money coming into play, we would have to hold a reserve on universities going into next fiscal year. The point that I'm just trying to make is, whether it was a 7% reduction or some other amount, we have to lower those expenses, the state's expenses here, and I'm just trying to acknowledge that while we are reducing them by 7%, that hopefully the CARES Act dollars that are coming in can make up for some of those reductions.
Okay, I get what you're doing, and you're saying, look, everybody's taking a hit on the revenue, so everybody's got to take a hit, but I just want to be transparent about what it is that we're actually doing here, because, you know, we're gonna cut the universities by 7%, and maybe or maybe not, they can get the CARES money to put, you know, to replace that, but I sure would like to hear from them if, you know,
Okay,
at some
calling
point.
out all the university representatives, you want to come as a group,
And can I
talk about how you're using CARES money, or where CARES money is.
Doc, Chairman, could I make just one more comment before you
Yes.
turn it over? You know, I'll just say that, you know, as we've been looking how we pare down spending for next year, you know, right off the bat, the governor made it a priority that we try to I guess, you know, reduce state government's expenses first before we start to look at universities and K through 12 and other things. So, you know, back in, I think it was in May 21st, we announced the 15% reduction for state agencies. So, I mean, we're cutting our state agencies, you know, more than twice as much as we're reducing the appropriation to universities. We've announced that we're foregoing the you know, we fought really hard in this past session for House Bill 1007 that would have allowed us to cash fund some projects instead of borrowing those. We're pulling those back. In the governor's State of the State address, he announced that you know, using 100 million of the 150 million that was in the budget for deferred maintenance, he announced that we would use 100 million of that for DNR, state parks, rehab and everything. We are now backing off of that proposal. He's directed me to make sure that we revert 110 of that 150 million. And so anyway, my point is we're trying to really make sure that we the brunt of this is going to be borne by the governor's agencies before we start reducing you know, funding to universities. Lastly, I'll just say, you know, when we were looking at this, what reduction, we were also trying to consider what other revenue sources that the universities have, and it really varies by university, but often, you know, the state's contribution to universities is, and again, varies widely by university, but, you know, it may only be a half to a third of the total funding that the universities receive.
Mr. Good.
Foremost, it's just great to see you all in person. Can I say that? My name is Greg Good. I'm with Indiana State University, also an alum of Indiana State. Transforms a lot of lives. And the far vast majority of the students who come to Indiana State University are from Indiana. And that's our unique, distinctive mission. We work with a lot of first-generation college students. You hear me and you hear President Curtis reiterate that every single time we come before you. And I say that because we put, in every decision that we make, we put those students first. Budget Director Jackson, I think, captured it well, and I appreciate that. And I also want to just reiterate that the state of Indiana is very generous to public higher education. You know, over in Terre Haute, we're just a few miles away from the state line that separates Illinois and Indiana, and there's really a big difference about how two states side by side approach fiscal matters and the types of commitments that they are able to make or not able to make to public higher education. And in many states, it's not uncommon to see these kind of wild swings, feast or famine when it comes to higher ed, double-digit cuts a particular year or increases, and it's very hard to operate that way. Well, that doesn't happen in Indiana because the state has made a number of very, what I would consider very fiscally prudent decisions, fiscal discipline, and able to make its commitments, not only in the general operating appropriation, but the tremendous investment in university construction projects that helps local economies and puts people to work. That said, we are all sharing the load here, if you will, of getting through this terrible pandemic. And I can't speak for all of higher education, but I can speak for Indiana State University. We want to be your partner through this. And if it's 7% reserve, then so be it. We're going to figure out a way to do it, just like the state agencies have to figure out a way, just like families have to figure out a way to get through this. And it's not a surprise that this reserve was coming either. I mean, we knew that this was going to have to come, and we're going to get through it. I do want, though, to make sure that it is clear, and Senator Talion mentioned this and Director Jackson mentioned this, we can't just simply use the CARES Act dollars as general operating revenue replacement. And we're still working through what really can we use it on. We're putting together our ideas, but we are, as we should be, going to be held accountable for how those dollars are spent. And Senator Talion, you're correct. It's not as if the money's just there and let's start spending it. It has to be reimbursed for things that specifically fall within the parameters of a COVID-related instance. And COVID has hit all of us. It's hit us all a little differently. Each institution, because of the type of institutions we are, some of us are a little bit more dependent on state appropriation than others. I think Director Jackson mentioned that, and that's true. But we want to be your partner through all of this, and we're going to get through it, is I guess my message to you all.
Thank you. Any other university people want to come up and say anything about CARES Act money?
Yes, Susan Brock-Williams with Purdue University. I echo everything my colleague Greg said. We are prepared to make the budget work. We understand the state's situation. We've been through this before, so we're running all kinds of scenarios at Purdue in terms of budget reality. So we thank you for the higher ed support you do give us. On the CARES Act funding, yes, half goes to the students, half goes to the universities. The half that goes to the universities must be non-budgeted, coronavirus-related kind of expenses. So at Purdue in the fall, with our work to make things as safe as possible for students, we expect to spend about $53 million on that effort. Cleaning supplies, PPE, all the things we have to do. We also lost some revenue because students, had to go home early, so we refunded a portion of their housing. There's a dining numbers in there as well. That was about $10.7, I think, million we lost. So we plan to use the other half of our coronavirus related funding through CARES Act, which was about $11.2 million at West Lafayette, for things to cover what we expect in the fall for the safety measures we're taking at this point. It's a small portion of the $53 million, but it will go towards that.
Senator Talion, you have a question?
I just wanted to ask both of you, do you expect to get through this cut without raising tuition?
Yes. That's Purdue. You know that Purdue will not raise tuition on that.
Okay.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think all of the universities, we work in partnership with the commission who makes its tuition target recommendation, and we have always strived to stay within that, and that will continue to be our commitment to our students.
Senator Taylor?
I'd like to know the CARES Act funding, how much of it's going to be used for direct student tuition assistance? I mean, everybody's going to be, not only the universities, did they lose revenue, people lost jobs, people lost income, people lost money in their retirement accounts. Are you using any of that money to help tuition assistance for the students?
Well, the CARES Act does spell out what the monies can be used for. We all have a process now in place for doling the money back out to the students. So they fill out a sort of a survey as to what their expenses were related to, maybe moving back home, what expenses were related to that, lost job revenue, covering, you know, they're already on financial aid. The students who get the CARES Act money have to be on a FAFSA type of situation. They have to complete that, have already had that on file. So the financial aid portion will cover the tuition amounts, but I think the CARES Act money will go toward other incidental expenses related to coronavirus and having to cut their education short.
I don't know how that doesn't relate to tuition. I guess when I see the term emergency aid to students and the CARES Act funding that you got, I think of tuition. I guess I don't think about what it costs for gas to go home, or, you know, to me, those things are interrelated.
Yes.
So I don't know. I guess are you guys going to keep a record? Do you have to give an accounting to the federal government for that?
Yes.
Good. So we'll see what you spend it on either way, right?
Senator Michelin?
So you say you can't backfill your budget, but can't you use it for the reimbursement you had to give to the kids to give their money back for room and board? Can't you use it to backfill the cost that you had to refund?
I think we are going to do a combination of both that.
But you can use it for
Yeah,
that.
I'm pretty sure. I have a report here I can read from. Hold on. So for fiscal year 20, we had around 10.8 million in lost revenue due to housing and dining, study abroad, and other fees due to refunds. We plan to use the CARES institutional money to offset a small portion of the new reopening costs and lost revenue.
And also, all in, is it fair to say that you're basically getting flatlined from 20 to 21?
Well, Purdue's losing, I guess, according to the chart, 3.2 million. But I mean, you know, we are ready to deal with what has to happen here in the state of Indiana. So to us, it's, you know, 7%, 10% reserves. We're willing to work with whatever, you know, you have to give us in this regard. So it's, Ivy Tech comes out ahead. I don't know how much ISU, but we're not looking at it like that necessarily. We're going to be team players here and do our best to adjust accordingly.
I think Purdue does.
Ms. Poltrice, do you want to speak?
If I recall.
Good afternoon. So I want to, of course, echo my colleagues, Greg Good and Susan and Williams, and say that we're very thankful to the state for all of the investments and steadiness related to higher education, and also that we certainly understand that we need to play a part just like the state agencies and other units of government in all of this. What I would say is we're certainly in a better situation than so many other states who have experienced double-digit cuts. But when you look at the CARES Act money, I think I do want to clarify just a couple of things. When you look at the funds that can be used for institutional expenses, and you look at perhaps how Ball State is planning to use those, the lost revenues, or the tuition refunds, the room and board refunds, those are in fiscal year 20, not 21. And so that money that we're getting back will not cover the over $8 million that we'll have in those refunds. And so, so there is a bit of a difference. That being said, we certainly understand that we need to make those cuts, and we will make that work with our budget, but that will be used in fiscal year 20. Additionally, when you look at the funds that go to the students, it is not that we have to refund it directly to the students. So the money passes through us, but we can't say how it will be used. It just goes, it's packaged to the students. So we have a process where students will get, I think, you know, Susan mentioned an application. We will send automatically to students who have need and have filled out the FAFSA. We will
distribute that money directly to them. Some of it has already been distributed, and then there will be emergency funds. We also have fundraising within our foundation for other sorts of uses. Those may include tuition, but largely the tuition had already been paid for the fall. So the CARES Act money wouldn't be for tuition, or excuse me, for the spring.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Mary Jane Michalak with Ivy Tech Community College. Just to clarify, it's been said a couple of times here that Ivy Tech will come out ahead in this, and that is not entirely true. Yes, if it were a dollar-for-dollar exchange, there would be an increase in funding to Ivy Tech, but again, institutional aid from the CARES Act is not a dollar-for-dollar exchange. At this point in time, Ivy Tech has been able to be reimbursed for about $3.5 million out of the $16.5 million in the institutional funds. Excuse me, had a cough there. $3.5 million is what we've been able to get reimbursed from that $16.5 million at this point. Unlike my colleagues, we don't have room and board that we were refunding. We do have students who may have dropped classes, but we have not been able to attribute that directly to COVID. We have refunds every semester that we provide, and so we've not been able to directly tie the refunds for tuition due to COVID, and so we're unsure that we would be able to use that in order to backfill that lost revenue. Again, just like my colleagues, Ivy Tech is willing to do our part, and we are willing to make the budget work, to make the state of Indiana's budget work. I just wanted to clarify again, it's not a dollar for dollar, but we're willing to do our part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything further?
Thank you.
Okay. We'll next go on to the Family and Social Service Medicaid. I thought Ms. Taylor. Floor's yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Allison Taylor. I am the Medicaid Director within Indiana's Family and Social Services Administration. Today, I have a handful of state plan amendments that we would like to present to you for your review. If it's all right, Dr. Brown, Chairman Brown will just run through. So the first is a state plan amendment with no fiscal impact. It is a technical correction. In our state plan amendment, we reference the diagnosis-related grouper classifications and software version. That's how we pay and reimburse for inpatient hospital services. One of the pages out of many references an old version. It's outdated, so we're going to go back and correct that, and we're actually going to make a clarification in there and just reference CMS's website, which maintains the most recent version, so that we don't have to come back to you in the future if we do as we update versions. We're on version 39 now for your information. Okay.
Question? Continue.
Okay. The next state plan amendment we have for you has a very small fiscal impact, and it is updating our state statute from legislation back in 2019 that required Medicaid to add licensed mental health counselors, licensed clinical addiction counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists to the statutorily designated list of eligible providers that can bill under the prospective payment system for FQHCs or the PPS. So this is legislation that brings our state plan into compliance with that statute.
Questions? Yes, Representative Hamilton?
I'll wait till she's finished.
Till the
Sorry.
end? Okay. Do you anticipate this plan amendment will increase access slightly?
Yeah, we do. We think at least 6 FQHCs at this time would take advantage of utilizing these types of providers more in the FQHC setting.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Okay. Next, we have another state plan amendment on MAGI. It's got a small fiscal impact, and this is from legislation in 2020 that essentially prohibited Medicaid from counting income earned by an individual who's employed in a temporary job, like a census worker, for purposes of Medicaid eligibility. So we worked with our partners at CMS and identified what is called a reasonable MAGI-based income methodology, and it's really just an alternative way to make sure that we have reasonable and predictable income, and basically prorates monthly income. So an individual that works a couple of months out a year won't be ineligible due to that 2 months of all that income. And so that's for our non-Magi population. So it's got a relatively small fiscal impact, but just.
Senator Talion?
So the proration for temporary or seasonal employment, that will be a permanent.
It will be, yeah.
Okay, and the census workers, can we tell our constituents that if you are a census worker, it will not affect your Medicaid? Can we tell them that?
I don't know if I'm capable. Can I get back to you on that? Because I think it would maybe depend on what other income they have throughout the year, right? So we're, and we actually, CMS has a targeted PowerPoint and presentation on census worker in relation to this, so we could maybe take a look at those materials and let you know.
Okay, so what I'm reading here where it says that HEA 1009 prohibits counting income, that's not exactly what CMS is allowing us, is that right?
My understanding is we are changing it to this Magi-based income methodology, and so it is a proration.
It will be used, it could be counted then.
I think if it triggers, but if it's census and it's that limited amount, I think that it is set up in a way that you wouldn't trigger the threshold. So if you don't mind, if I could go back and ask our eligibility expert, I'd hate to give you wrong information, but we can absolutely, because that was the impetus of the bill, so I want to make sure you get the right information.
Right, and the reason I've already had people ask about unemployment and census, so I'm just anticipating being asked that same question, so thank you.
We can talk to, I can talk to my team, and maybe we can work on an informational bulletin too. That might help as we make this change for July. Yeah, absolutely. I'll make a note.
Thank you. Next.
All right, moving on, we have a state plan amendment with no fiscal impact relating to our administrative law judges. So there was legislation from 2019 that established a central and independent hearing process for disputes that included FSSA and OMPP, and we do within FSSA have 26 administrative law judges and some staff that go along with. So this is a state plan amendment. We had to change our state plan because it references our office in the state plan. So this is just updating to come into compliance with that statute.
Yes, Senator Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Taylor, the ALJs are actually paid by the Office of Administration and Law Proceedings, so is it separate from your budget?
So my understanding is that we have, it will come from our budget. So we have an MOU with the new office, and we'll continue to allocate costs to help that department run, and we'll account for our portion of that.
Okay, so you paid the new office that's been created to kind of create this image of independence is now your ALJs will go to that office and you will actually pay for them through your budget.
Yeah, my understanding is we'll continue the same way we did before. We've got the cost center, so we'll just transfer funds over through that MOU.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I thought the actual objective of that legislation was to have the ALJs be independent of their agencies, both financially as well as, at least that's what I thought. I mean, I believe that's Representative Sturwald's legislation, if I remember correctly. How do we get there? I mean, having them pay the bill the same way doesn't get us to independence. It's just an umbrella.
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's totally off based on what we're talking about here fiscally, but I think that's something we need to look at. If it's still coming out of their budget and they're still being paid by the same department, I think the independency is not there, so.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Senator Taylor. Moving on to enrolling licensed mental health providers. This is a state plan amendment with no fiscal impact. This too is a change that brings us into compliance with state legislation that expanded the provider types eligible to supervise a plan of treatment for a member's outpatient mental health and substance use disorder treatment services. So prior to this, professionals had to bill using a supervising professional's MPI, and this allows these providers, which are licensed social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical addiction counselors, and licensed mental health counselors, to directly enroll with the Medicaid program. And they will still be, it's cost neutral because we are still reimbursing at 75%. So it's the same reimbursement rate, but we will have a little more visibility into the practice of these providers, because they'll be enrolling directly with us, and they'll have their own MPI. So happy to answer any questions.
Senator Brown?
Actually, 3 questions. Are these therapists limited by any scope of practice?
Yeah, I would assume they're going to be governed by their scope of practice with the licensing agency or their accrediting organization.
And this also covers their telehealth reimbursement then? I imagine it doesn't really matter. They're being reimbursed, but now they can do it independently.
Yeah, so we I don't know. I'd have to go back and look how it fits into telehealth. You know, we're in this emergency period as well, where we've got extra flexibility within telemedicine right now. And so that's a good question. I could take that back and kind of compare it up against, does this change anything in the old world order, in the current world? And then, you know, we are kind of looking at how do we long-term sustain some of the access and opportunity in telemedicine. So good questions. If we could get back together and talk about that, I could let you know how this plays out.
Yeah, because I actually, although I can imagine initially there may not be a fiscal impact, if all of these licensed therapists are not required to have a supervising professional, I'm curious if more will open their own offices since they can be reimbursed directly. So with that, though, in the telehealth, it would be nice when you have those numbers, and I'm sure it's still kind of raw, to see, particularly we're hearing anecdotally with the lockdowns, that people are trying to or accessing mental health services more. So it'd be interesting to see what those numbers are as well. Thank you.
Good point.
Further questions? Next.
Okay,
Ms. Tate.
thank you. Our final state plan amendment for you today, again, has no fiscal impact. It involves our non-emergency medical transportation benefit. And so this one, as you know, we've had touch points with stakeholders for a couple of years now on NEMT, both within the commission, but we also have other stakeholder work streams, and there's a handful of enhancements that have been identified along the way that we're incorporating into our state plan amendment. I can hit those for you really quick, but one of them, we are removing prior authorization requirements for trips over 50 miles. This rarely happens, but when it happens, 80% of the time, it's a hospital transport directed by a clinical professional as medically necessary. So those complicated patients that need to get from one specialty hospital maybe to another. And that happens in the EMS realm largely. And so we found that to be an administrative barrier for the EMS folks in the hospitals that are trying to do those transfers. So pulling that back, but we are adding on prior authorization for transports out of state. So unless they're a designated sister city with our Medicaid program, and then just generally other enhancements that we are making. These were actually at CMS request. We are clarifying in our state plan our gas and family reimbursement program, which is the program where we seek to encourage family members to transport members to their appointments. CMS thought it's it was a good thing, and we should memorialize that in state plan a little further. And then also CMS wanted us to put language in there that certainly guides us generally, but again, ensuring reimbursement for the shortest and most efficient route, wanted us to emphasize that in our state plan amendment too.
Thank you. Do other states do this?
Which one?
Huh?
Which one of the?
The family members' transportation and reimbursement?
Yeah, so they do, they do. I don't think it's entirely consistent, and not all states have developed that as a benefit. So we've actually had a lot of conversations with CMS, and I wasn't in the recent conversations, but they just encouraged us to document it in our state plan.
Okay. Further questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The last review item is actually Mr. Johnston on the extension and amendment for $100 million. You want to do that first? Are you?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much. If and I don't want to take control of your agenda, but I believe the items we have as the agreements over $100 million will be covered in the discussion item about the CARES Act in detail.
Okay.
So I think if I just lead into that, then
Sure.
We can cover that.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Again, good afternoon. My name's Chris Johnston. I'm the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And what I would like to do is cover and review with you the administration of the CARES Act funding, or really what you'll see here is 4 different packages of federal assistance that has come in. And in fact, I think we will cover some ground that was already covered by Representative Porter and Senator Taylor on some of the topics that were raised earlier. So on page 1, as I mentioned, there were really 4 different packages that have been adopted so far from the federal government. And most of them were in March, just roughly a week apart. And then at the end of April was the final package that was adopted. The state of Indiana and states in general have participated in each of these, but really have to different extents, and we'll go through that here in a second. And so the next 4 charts are really sort of wheels, if you will, of the money. And this, I need to cite my source here. This is from the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. This is one of the oversight committees that the federal government has stood up to review these activities. It's really a panel, a collection of inspectors generals from the federal government, and they have just stood up their website. They had their first organizational meeting, I think, June 4th, to get organized around the different funding streams. And so I just, in full disclosure, took this from their websites here. But the first package that was adopted the first week of March was identified or labeled the Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. And really, that's sort of federal government speak, is that this was just really, as you see, supplemental appropriations, additional funding through existing programs. And as you can see, there's different buckets that will be similar in each of these charts, the next 3 charts as well. And so they've got the bucketed amount for public services. And by public services, that's really money that has stayed at the federal government level for agencies, federal agencies administering their programs. You have some oversight money. Global assistance is a range of things, different programs. But then the yellow shade is really state, local, and tribal governments. And in this first program, what Indiana saw was really just some preparedness money to our Department of Health, and we'll talk about, I'll get into some of these details here, but that was the primary purpose of this program. The outbreak was starting to take hold. The federal government wanted to get state health departments and other health centers, hospitals prepared, and so this was really, I think it was about $14 million to the Department of Health to start their preparedness activities and to buy personal protective equipment primarily. The next package was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And as you could tell by the title, it really was individual focused. It was the focus here under the state and local government, the $1 billion, really dealt with employment matters, expanded eligibility for unemployment insurance, nutrition programs where the SNAP guidelines were eased, programs or funding for congregate meals that are administered by the Family and Social Services Administration here in Indiana, the Women, Infant, and Children program, and then emergency sick and family leave. So it was really driven more towards the employee and individual assistance. The other component in this, though, was the enhanced Medicaid matching, the enhanced FMAP, was an additional, I believe, 6.2%. The next package at the end of March, so this is the CARES Act. This is the others, were sort of the preliminary, but this is the big funding, almost $2 trillion. And as you can see, there's a lot going on in this wheel. And so it's the largest one. It has numerous programs that were direct to recipients. There were lending programs that you may have heard about as far as liquidity programs from the Federal Reserve, but the Paycheck Protection program. And then there's a lot of supplemental funding to existing programs. And so let me give you a couple of examples here. On the money that has gone directly to other entities, this is various industry groups ranging from the agricultural community to the healthcare and hospital industry as well. And so, and we'll talk about this in a couple of slides, where I've tried to break out that funding that has come directly to the recipient, whoever that may be, and then the other funds that have come or are passing through state government, of which we are responsible for monitoring. The one, and so, as I mentioned, there were a lot of programs that were just supplemental fundings here. The two that we will talk about a little bit more is education related. There were 3 programs that have some similarities to how education funding comes from the federal government to local education agencies. And then the big fund, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which we'll spend some time talking about that. The last package that was adopted at the end of April on slide 5 here was really primarily to replenish the Paycheck Protection Program. There was a flurry of activity, a lot of confusion. The U.S. Government was trying to work through the banking system to get the PPP out to small businesses. I think through 2 installments. So this was really a replenishment. The PPP was in the CARES Act, but this was a replenishment of those funds. And the last statistics I had from both installments of this program for PPP, Indiana businesses, there were 76,000 businesses that were approved for a total of $9.5 billion. The other component in this I want to point out, in the small sliver that's not so small, but the sliver that's $11 billion to state and local governments, was one where I think the magnitude of the pandemic and the need for testing and contact tracing and all those things, that was a substantial and really directed amount to state governments, state health departments, community health centers, as well as rural health centers to bolster and really ramp up testing capabilities. Let me stop there just, with the 4 packages and see if anyone has any questions related just to the federal side. Okay, if not. So here's where I wanted to break down a little bit. I know in your various communities, you've probably heard about people receiving or hearing about different programs, and this is where when you read different periodicals that come out and they talk about, here's how much money is coming to the states. You'll see big numbers, and in this case, there are reports, an entity called FFIS that compiles a lot of this information, and you'll see these reports, and it'll say Indiana got $5 billion, but we need to break it out into these 2 components because about 1.6 of that $5 billion is going directly to the recipient and does not pass through state government. And let me give you a few examples. I'd mentioned before, there's direct funding to hospitals, there's direct funding to some community health centers, and there's about 27 of these programs that are going directly to recipients. There are farmers, airports, and a good example as far as local government are community development block grants. Okra, a state agency, gets community development block grants for its distribution to small communities in Indiana. They do the administration of that block grant. But there are entities, communities, counties, and cities that meet a certain population, and they're deemed entitlement communities. And so there might be community development block grant money that has gone directly to Fort Wayne, let's say, or South Bend, city of Indianapolis. And so those are some other examples that are governmental entities, but again, have not passed, those funds have not passed through state government. So the other categories are the $3.6 billion is going to be received or passing through Indiana state government. And they range in as far as functional areas, education, community development, transit dollars, public health, human services, and the coronavirus relief fund. To date, we have received formal award letters, and so they've been set up in the state's accounting system for about 90% of that money. You know, you may find it surprising that, you know, this has been really a topic of a lot of discussion and urgency, but there are still, even though it's announced in the legislation, some of the federal awarding agencies still have to craft their programs and their procedures for granting this money out to the state recipients, and so it does take some time. But we've got it about 90% of the 45 grants totaling the $3.6 billion set up in our accounting system. So what I'd like to do next is talk about some of the state agencies that are participating in the program. And just at a very high level, and then we'll get into some specific programs. The Indiana Department of Health has received, or is going to be the recipient of 8 grants, totaling $232 million, mostly for the public health crisis response, enhancing laboratory capacity, and some food assistance. FSSA has received 10 grants for about $100 million, $103 million. I've mentioned in one of the previous slides, home and congregate meals, other supportive services, the Child Care Development Block Grant, which is an existing program that's just, they've received additional funding for that. Okra has received 2 installments of the Community Development Block Grant. for a total of $38 million. And then the Housing and Community Development Authority has received 5 grants totaling $64 million. DWD, mostly UI implementation and administrative support grants, $31 million in 7 grants. Department of Transportation has received 2 grants specifically for the transit program. This is a federal program that is solely for transit systems, and they break the funding down between urban areas and non-urban areas. It's formula-driven, based on ridership. I believe usually on ridership. We all know that ridership in transit is going down, so I assume it's on a historical basis. And that is money that will come through our Department of Transportation, but then sent on to the various transit companies. And then the Department of Education has received 2 grants, and the governor's office is collaborating with the Department of Education on a 3rd grant that we'll talk about here shortly. But the big ones, and again, going back to our review items, we're going to talk about the elementary and secondary school grant. That one was approximately $214 million. And the school nutrition grant, which again is just additional funding of the school lunch program that's used for schools as well as other child care entities. I believe that was $164 million. And I have those. We'll get into those a little more in a second. FSSA has, so these are, the next couple of slides, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into some of the specific programs. So FSSA received several grants related to the Older Americans Act, about $20 million. They're partnering with their area agencies on aging for nutrition and support services. Almost all of it has been spent or at least obligated. And again, they work through their existing network. I believe there's 15 or 16 AAAs that they work through in a variety of capacities. And then also the CCDF, or the Child Care Development Fund, or Child Care Development Block Grant, to support child care centers that are experiencing the reduction in enrollment, and about $51 million has been obligated there. Department of Health, I mentioned the $14 or $15 million in one of the first packages in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, using PPE, buying testing kits, laboratory supplies, and that was really early on in the pandemic. They passed on through the Indiana Hospital Association Hospital Improvement Plan grant at $3.2 million. And then this last one was adopted. I've mentioned that last package, federal package, was for enhanced testing. And that's what this $183 million is for. And they have to submit, the Department of Health has to submit a plan back to the CDC, which they are doing this week, in order to access these funds. And so, in fact, I think on your agenda, Mr. Chairman, this was one that was added after we received this award after the agenda was put together. So this should have been part of the $100 million threshold for the review items. Department of Education, the $164 million, the Child Nutrition Program, $54 million has been spent to date. This is on it's an existing program, but specifically the additional funding for the COVID-19 response, and this works through schools, child care programs, and other community programs. And it's a reimbursement-based program based on the number of meals served. The $192 million, or the $214 million, was a specific one of the 2 programs, or excuse me, 3 programs that I mentioned dealing with education. This is specifically for K through 12, the elementary and secondary school emergency relief program. The $192 million is going to be distributed based on the Title I, the relative share of Title I formula. And then 10% is being reserved by the Department of Education to provide state-level services for virtual teaching and learning, and then really targeting specific groups that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mentioned Okra and the Community Development Block Grant programs. So they had actually started repurposing their existing CDBG grant before they got these related to COVID. That's the last bullet on this slide. And so they had redirected some of their current CDBG funding to that. But then these are specific ones related to the pandemic that they have been awarded. First one for $19 million. They've done one phase already, and they're doing a second phase coming in August. And then they just received a second award for $20 million. So CDBG is really working with these smaller communities, and it'll be a range of programs such as micro-loan grant programs. Some communities have revolving loan programs to help their businesses in their communities, but it's really community-based services. Then the last two programs I'd like to highlight is the $61 million called the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And this is a collaboration between the Governor's Office, CHE, and Department of Education to create a program to improve remote learning, and their focus is going to be on the acquisition of devices so that we have the capacity out at homes and communities, but then also work on connectivity as far as any challenges in those communities that are being identified, having those, but then also the professional development of being able to teach in a remote learning environment. And then the last one where we're going to take a few slides here right after this is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is $2.4 billion. So all of those last three slides, those add up to about that $3.6 billion that have been awarded. And as you can tell, most of them are through existing programs that's just supplemental funding, where the guidance from the federal government may actually be focusing it more on COVID, but they're really using the existing program parameters to get the money out to the state governments or local governments. Questions from the committee as we stop here?
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. On page 13, your $61 million Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, is that still a 2-to-1 match?
I don't believe there's a match requirement to this.
In regards to the connectivity or anything like that, is there a match on that?
I think in trying to structure the competitive program, there was discussion about the match. Let me check on that if that's a requirement, because the competitive program guidelines are being put together now to be sent out to respond to. I don't know whether that's a requirement or not on the devices.
And this is basically for rural communities, is that correct?
No, I think it's going to be.
It's for everyone?
This is going to be by.
It's all for the
I think
300?
it's identifying the communities that have been most adversely impacted or highlighting this need for remote learning resources because of the pandemic. So
Okay.
it could be rural or it could be urban.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for this. Nice presentation. I really appreciate this. I do have some questions about the $2.4 billion. And you've identified three major categories, which still only add up to only a part of that.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you this question. And I know that the governor is supposed to be talking about, or I heard that the governor is supposed to be talking about some of this today, but we're hearing from a lot of our local schools that they are very worried about their count for the fall. They don't know what their ADM might be. Some parents are saying they're going to keep their kids home. Have we figured out whether there's any way to use some of this money to basically guarantee an ADM level for K through 12 schools?
Okay.
Have you looked at this at
Well,
all?
So you've thrown a lot at me here.
Actually, that was only one question.
Which is great, and I want to get to that because you raised an important point about how much has been identified. And
Yeah.
this gets back to, I think, either Senator Taylor or Representative Porter's comment about the use of the money and any additional federal assistance. So I want to touch on that in a couple of slides when I get to it.
Okay, I'll wait.
No,
Whether they're teaching them at home or parents don't want to send them or they're in school, do you think the parents will still have the instructional aspect through that school corporation, so they'll have to touch base with that school?
I don't know the answers to all these questions, and I don't know I'm not an education specialist, so I don't know what kind of guidance the DOE has put out to local school corporations as to how they might structure their classrooms, whether it's part-time, whether it's part online. But I know between the ADM count problem and the fact that we've got this, I wrote it down and I'm going to see if I can find it. We have this requirement in our statute that basically said if a school teaches more than X percentage of its classes as, how much? 50? Then they have to become a virtual school, and a lot of them don't want, and I don't know what that means for them. So I'm trying to figure out how we can, at least give the schools some surety, some certainty as to, all right, they're going to be able to operate with this much money beginning in September.
Yeah, and I guess this is just Tim Brown and a discussion we've had. I think that the child or the family will have to touch base with the corporation in some way. I mean, if they're at home, they'll have to touch base and get instructions or let them know they're at home, and we'll count them as students. So we'll still have, I guess, the September count day, and whether you're in the classroom or you're at home, you're counted.
I imagine school corporations would be happy to hear you say that.
Well, I just said it. Senator Mistler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the real question in it, what you're talking about is when we did the budget, it said that, if you're in the classroom, you get 100% of the funding. If you receive 50% or more of your instruction virtually, you only get 85% of the funding. So the concern that the schools have is if these kids do a hybrid method or choose not to come back, but they still participate in the traditional public school, what happens then? Are they going to be considered 85% or 100%? And we've had discussions, I know Zack wants to probably answer this for you, but it'll have to be changed legislatively because it's in the statute. So we've discussed it, and I don't know if it's going to be brought up today, but if Zack wants to, my opinion is, I'll just give my opinion if that's okay, that we should give a waiver at least for the next year until we see what it looks like. So schools, if some of the kids do more than 50%, they should still get the 100% funding. And I think that's the question you're asking. And I support that. And it has to be done legislatively. So I think I heard Dr. Brown say kind of the same thing.
Right.
So I think we're on the same page that there should be some kind of waiver that, at least for the next, the first year, next year of the school year, they should have some kind of waiver, so.
All right, and like I said, I was asking Chris, if we have to do that, Is there some way to use any of this money for that purpose?
Okay. Well, the governor at his press availability this afternoon is going to provide some certainty, I believe, as far as funding goes for fiscal year '21. And so I think we'll be able to speak to that. I think what you're raising, the discussion amongst the committee members here, is going to be an important one. But I think, in fact, I do believe it's going to have to be resolved legislatively. And so there's going to be probably a process of counting that needs to be developed, I guess, for in September, but then has to be revisited in the legislative session and probably in February, or for the February count, would be my guess. But I'm definitely not a school funding expert.
Zack?
Thank you. Without being redundant of what's already been said, the piece that I'll add is that there was a memo sent out, I believe it was Monday this week, but I could be wrong about that, but a memo sent out by the Department of Education specifically on this topic, and I don't know if you've seen a copy of that memo, but it basically said that their intent would be, as students start coming back in the fall, for these kind of students that, the way I see it is that students that had already been going to a virtual school or a virtual program offered by a traditional school, the way I would read it is that they're kind of grandfathered in at the 85% of foundation level, whereas going forward for this fall, students that would now be electing, and their parents would be electing to go with some more, with the, even if they were doing things more than 50% virtually, that those schools should code their time as virtual due to COVID, and that and that DOE would continue to reimburse for those students at the 100% of foundation, as opposed to the reduced level that Senator Mishler mentioned, that 85% level.
Okay.
Continue, Chris.
Okay, thank you. And so, Senator Talion, to follow up on your questions here, you raised some interesting points, which I think get back to why can't we use money for certain things. And so the next slide, slide 14, goes through that. And so while it reads like it's very accommodating, the guidance that has come out from the U.S. Treasury, in a sense, is very restricting, in that the $2.4 million, the eligible uses, are for necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to the COVID-19 crisis or disease. And that there's separate guidance on what the word necessary means. It can't be for an expense that was already accounted for in the most recent approved budget. And it has to be for an expense that was incurred between March and December of 2020. And so while it sounds like there's broad use there, it's actually very restricting to the medical expenses and health expenses and some payroll expenses that are related to first responders to the pandemic. Now, and then specifically in the U.S. Treasury guidance, it says revenue replacement is not a permissible use. And so this particular fund it's the first time that the U.S. Treasury, maybe I shouldn't say the first time, the U.S. Treasury does not usually administer grant programs. And so their guidance was essentially a 4-page document, and there's been two installments of frequently asked questions. Because of all the things questions like you've been raising, the states have been sending it in and asking for responses, is this an eligible expense? And so that's why we'll get into some of the uses of the money. Some that are very clear-cut and can move down that path. And there's others that the states are waiting for additional guidance. And I think Senator Taylor mentioned this in the discussion earlier this morning. There's a lot of speculation about, is there going to be an additional federal assistance package in July? Then the other flip side is, no, there may not be, but we're going to give you more flexibility with the package that you already have. And so that's why, to be honest with you, in the next couple of slides, they only add up to about $1.5 billion out of the 2.4, because most states are holding back, saying, well, if I don't get any sort of budgetary relief or additional assistance from the federal government, but I do get flexibility because of these funds, I want to be able to have that money available to do what address the priorities in our budgets. And I would say most states are doing that, and we have calls frequently through the National Governors Association. I know Zack is on calls with the State Budget Officers Association, and most states are taking that approach. So what we have identified are the major use categories. The ones that are very straightforward are public health emergency direct expenditures. And again, these are estimates because as we've put sort of targeted amounts, and they change almost weekly because of either the guidance coming from the U.S. Treasury or because there have been additional grants that have been awarded that change how we want to think about using this money. Because in one example, I talked about the $183 million going to the Department of Health for testing. Well, we had originally used a lot of that money or allocated a lot of that money from this relief fund, but now that they've got the funds over there that can be used for actually 2.5 years instead of the 7 months that we have available, we're rethinking how to best maximize the funds between those two grant opportunities. But I listed some examples of how we're going to be using it. Paying for the PPE that we've purchased. And again, I have to tip a hat to IEDC that they really got out of the gate. It was quite the wild, wild west, if you will, as far as buying PPE, and everybody, as far as vendors, saying that they could deliver certain products, either as far as quality or the amount of the supply. It was really quite interesting time, particularly early on. But then there's other costs, such as dealing with COVID at our state prisons that'll be eligible costs. Ramping up the UI call center is an eligible cost. So all these things that are directly related, that are payroll costs or contracting costs, we're tallying those, and again, we've sort of bucketed about $500 million, but again, that's an estimate with what we know now. And then the other thing about the amount that we haven't allocated already is maybe having to use even more of this money if there's a flare-up in the fall. You might have to use it for some of these same expenses going forward. The bottom half here, the $500 million for other state cost recovery, here is the one thing that the U.S. Treasury has allowed for budgetary relief, is they said that, I mentioned payroll costs for first responders, so they identified public health and public safety agencies as being able to recover those costs. They basically said they made a presumption that all of those costs, whether they actually fought the virus or not, would be eligible expenses. So that's going to be a good budget mitigation matter for us, is being able to use for state police, public health, excise police, being able to use those to cover payroll costs, and we're planning to do that as well. But we also have costs related to what you heard, like with the universities. We have reopening state office costs, and then costs related to remote work expenses. And then finally, on this slide, we have the $500 million for programs that we've announced already. And I'll go through a couple of those. We had mentioned the the governor had announced about a month ago the $300 million program allocation for local governments. And we've been working with the Association of Counties and the county commissioners and AIM to get that money distributed. It's been slow. I think I think they're looking at the process. They're gathering. It's a reimbursement program, so they have to gather their expenses and submit those. There's also the question of whether to go the FEMA route, which locals can get assistance through FEMA, or use this program. And we're working with Homeland Security to provide some clarity there as far as making good choices about those two reimbursement programs. Oh, yes.
If you are allowed to use public safety and health payroll for the state, are the local governments also, can they use that same presumption that those costs are, that payroll costs are reimbursable?
We have not passed that along to them yet. I mean, I think we're looking at, again, what the flexibility, true flexibility rules are as a whole before we open it up to every municipal and sheriff's department for that.
All right, so is that a decision that the state makes or that the Fed's eligibility rules make?
It's more of the discretion of the state.
So if we needed to spend some more money, is it possible to increase that $300 million to make more money available to locals who could then use it for police, fire,
Right.
ambulance, and local healthcare
Yeah,
people?
so they're already using it for the direct response, I mean, the cost recovery for those public safety
Yeah,
staff
that's what I'm
doing
asking.
that. So they're using that already, but as far as the staff that is not working on COVID-related things, that has not been extended to the entire department, if you will.
I see, okay.
Yeah. And, yes, Representative Porter.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Just a quick question. Before you go on to slide 16, or you're probably already there, 17 now. On slide 15, we had the 6 categories under the 500 million estimate, where the key word here to me is estimate of the 500 million. But as you alluded to, the testing and the contact tracing was funded out of another pot of dollars,
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
So is there a way that we can look at the future, getting some of that itemized on these 2 sections on where the dollars went? Because, you know, and I'll talk about this later, but and I appreciate you being here, but the state budget committee, we don't know anything. Only thing we know is you're here today. And so I think it's important, we have billions of dollars coming to the state, we should at least have some say so. Well, I don't know if my colleagues do, but I know I don't know anything, so.
Yeah,
that's it.
I can appreciate that, and you sort of beat me to my closing remarks, and that was,
I was teeing it up for you.
There you go. I appreciate that. At the request or permission of the chair, you know, I plan on coming back with the greater detail. As I mentioned, some of these are just getting set up now. If you looked at these dollars and what was actually spent, I'll say out of all of this money right now, we've spent maybe $200 million. Now, we've obligated more, but it takes time, you know, to not only set up the programs, but then if we're contracting for that contractor to submit an invoice, and we turn around and verify that they delivered the goods or delivered the services. And so there's not a lot of money spent, but you're exactly right. I plan to come back with greater detail. We're also working on a website that would have a lot of this information put out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. The IADC announced the $30 million small business program. This was structured to be more of a complement to the Paycheck Protection Program. There were some people that said either they just didn't have the accountants or lawyers or, you know, people ready to go and apply for that federal program. So that's what we were trying to target, are those people that still or still have the need for rent, utilities, to reopen their business. It's not a great amount of money, but it's really a bridge over several months to help them reopen, do the right things as far as social distancing and safety measures to reopen. And then the last one on this slide, 17, is the workforce. Teresa Lubbers from the Commission for Higher Ed and the Governor's Workforce Cabinet announced this program. We have a lot of people that have now been unemployed, and are there opportunities to not only just direct assistance, but help them think through, well, is there another opportunity for me to expand my skill set and improve my job skills? And so that's what that is about. It'll probably use the channels right now of the Workforce Ready Grant and the Employer Training Grant, which are pretty successful programs. People are aware of those, and in fact, I think we're using the Indiana Black Expo and others to advertise, help get that out, and hold conferences and conference calls to help market these programs.
Senator Taylor.
Thank you. Just one thing, Indiana Black Expo, I think, canceled their summer celebration for this summer, so find another means to get it out. The other piece is, one of the things that I've discovered during my discussions during this COVID-19 is that a lot of people who have not gone back to seek higher education haven't done so because they have outstanding debt or bills. I know specifically about one of the universities, Ivy Tech, that has a program right now for people to be forgiven for a portion. I think it's up to $2,000 for their tuition that they might owe. They get behind, can't afford it, and then they can't go back into school and pick up where they started from. Can any of these funds be used for that? That would be one creative way that I think, if this really is going to address people who want to get more educated and maybe find another resource or way to get, that would be a good thing.
These are training programs. So this program does not address that. These were just the training programs
So
for
these are
ramping up the
certificates,
skills.
but don't some of those certificates go through some of the universities?
I think this one, I can't speak in great detail. This one's mostly through Ivy Tech. I think they're mostly non-degree certificates. So.
If you go there and you owe Ivy Tech debt, I don't know if you can take their classes.
We'll follow up on that.
The second piece, second question I have for you, I stated something incorrectly earlier about the K through 12 funding that they got, that the charters and the vouchers got CARES funding, but so did traditional public schools. What I meant to say was that the charters and the voucher schools got PPP. So is there anything in the decisions of this $2.4 billion to make traditional public schools whole in that scenario?
Regarding PPE?
Well, let me give you the standing. Right now, we know that charter schools as well as virtual schools and, well, not virtual, I said virtual, voucher schools received PPP funds. They could apply in that, they received those funds.
Okay.
K through 12, traditional public did not.
Okay.
And could not because they were not eligible. So the question I have is there any discussion about making up something like that in the?
So two answers or responses to that. One, I'm not familiar with. It sounds like there's a specific program for the charter schools, and it was
the PPP funding.
Yeah. Oh well, but the PPP or PPE funding, like was the marketplace.
Right.
Are you talking about the
payroll protection program?
Oh, the payroll. Okay.
Was.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So there's a difference,
yep.
right? You get your payroll for 2.5 months. Actually, I think they're going to extend it, but they receive PPP,
Yeah.
and K through 12 traditional were not eligible.
Okay.
So has there been any thought about that?
Well, I can't, I'm not sure I can distinguish between the two. The program you're talking about is a federally run program. We cannot influence
But
that
the state,
program.
no, the state $2.4 billion. The state $2.4 billion can be used, correct me if I'm wrong, for a multitude of things. And part of it was the K through 12 funding, right?
No.
Okay,
K through 12 was a separate fund
okay.
for those, I mean, not the two, that's not embedded in the 2.4.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure just got that out there, because I didn't know if they were eligible or
Okay.
not. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I tried to ask earlier, but you didn't see me, so.
Then
Am I correct on that? Didn't they get PPP?
Well, traditional schools didn't have any cut of funding.
They got CARES funding, just like,
But they haven't had any cut of
Okay.
state funding either.
well, but the point I'm trying to make is we give, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, but we give funding to voucher schools and charters.
But you were asking about traditional public schools. They have not had any cut of funding.
Okay, I didn't, what is that? Neither have charters and vouchers received a cut in funding?
I don't believe so.
No.
But they got PPP.
Well, you can only get PPE if your
PP.
revenues are down.
No, not PPP. Payroll Protection Plan does
Right.
not require you to lose revenue to receive those funds.
Mr. Chairman, public entities can't get loans from private. And schools are public entities.
Okay.
That was the
Okay.
distinction I was trying to make earlier when I said CARES Act funding, and Mr. Jackson indicated that traditional public schools did, he is correct. I misstated. I wanted to bring it up. The PPP that they received, and we know they received it, the traditional public schools did not get PPP.
Okay.
Okay, I'll finish up here, Mr. Chairman. The last slide regarding these relief, recovery, and support programs, slide 18. We've been working with FSSA. There are certain day center services for the disabled and the aging that have basically been shut down because of, you cannot have more than 10 people congregate. And so we are working with FSSA, and they have put out programs as support payments for a period of time, similar to what we were just talking about with small businesses, to help support them over the next couple of months. And then also, as far as enhanced funding for a temporary period, there's been enhanced funding for COVID-specific nursing facilities. And so those have been in the FSSA world where we're trying to help those providers.
Representative Hamilton has a question.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. I just want a question and a statement. A few weeks ago, first of all, I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you. The first bullet point here caught my attention. I sent a letter to the governor 3 or 4 weeks ago about this very issue, and the response I received at the time was, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to make accommodations for this concern that we would lose these vital local resources. But it looks like that's been taken care of. I had not heard that.
Okay.
I'm not sure when this went into effect. I'm glad it is happening. Do you know the timeline? Do those facilities know about this opportunity already?
They do. I have, I've been copied on emails that FSSA has sent out sort of to their blast distribution to the network. And in fact, the one for the disabled, I think they formally opened up the window to put their application in, I think starting next week.
Okay, thank you.
As you've may have heard, we have a committee that's made up of other business leaders and folks familiar with the public sector. I'm working with Secretary Schellinger from IEDC to, again, we talk about these sorts of programs of how we can meet not only the requirements from the federal government, but then also make an impact with the state of Indiana and the communities that we serve. It's an advisory committee. There are no votes. We meet, we talk about things that they've heard out in their communities about particular needs. They identified the small example as the small business network of, look, I work with businesses. They don't have the capacity to go through the PPP program. Is there a way we could formulate a program to help out those businesses? We continue to meet mostly weekly here and evaluate other uses of the program. And then finally, oversight. I had mentioned the Federal Oversight Committee, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. They're just getting stood up. And we will be similar to the Recovery Act in 2009. There will be formal reporting required into the federal government. They're just starting to put that framework together. And then, as I mentioned, inspectors general will develop their own sort of review programs to make sure the money's being used appropriately. The U.S. Treasury has, again, they have reminded us on many calls that the $2.4 billion coronavirus relief fund will be subject to a review as far as the proper use of the money. And if it's not used appropriately or they disagree, states have to return the money to the federal government. And so as much as everybody in this room and other people have great ideas about how we can use the money, until we get further flexibility on how to use it, we have to meet the guidelines, or else they come in whenever that is, next year sometime, do their review, and then you might have to, if they don't agree with the use of the money, you might have to return it to them. That's why a lot of our programs are on a reimbursement basis with documentation. I know that's a cumbersome process, but as long as we have that, then that backs up, the use of the money.
And so let me say, Senator Taylor, you made the statement earlier about 2009, 2010, when the federal government gave money and helped us through that situation. This money specifically outlined are expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency respect to COVID disease, not accounted for in the budget, and only occur March 1st through December 30th, and it's not for revenue replacement. So the restrictions of this money is much, much, much greater than 2009.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, let me acquiesce to your definite reality that this money is restricted today. I hope that if it's unrestricted later, you will retract that statement. But here's the other point. Here's the other point. There are COVID-related budget items that we have in our budget that I'm sure we have the expertise and the knowledge with Mr. Jackson and his staff that can look creatively at what these things are going to go for.
I would agree that there's guidance that we're looking for in the questions, but to say that this money can be replaced in a lot of...
It can't. I agree. I never said that.
General usage.
I said assistance. I didn't say what it could be used for. And this is definitely assisted, Mr. Chairman. I'm not saying that, and we might want to just be careful as to today, and remember, December 2020 is not here yet.
Right.
So who knows what will happen in the next few months. And I respectfully agree with you that 2009 is a different scenario, but it was assistance. And I just consider this the same. That's the analogy I was trying to make.
Senator Talion?
Pre-approval process? Can you, in other words, before I spend the money on this, can I call and say, hey, is this okay? I mean, is there that capability?
There is not, because you've got at least 49 other entities that are asking all the questions. And so what seems to be happening is U.S. Treasury collects all the questions over a 2-week period from different states, and then they say that they're going to send out responses to those questions. Sometimes your question gets answered and sometimes it doesn't.
Representative Hamilton, do you?
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of comments. One, the first time that we've been able to comment publicly as legislators, most of us, if not all of us, legislators in the room, I want to comment about the Economic Relief and Recovery team. I just have to say publicly, I think it's very unfortunate that this wasn't a more structured, staffed task force with public meetings and notes that doesn't have legislative representation. A whole lot of big decisions are being made about our fiscal state of affairs without any legislative input. And I think that's one of our main jobs as a legislature, is to weigh in. I do understand time sensitivity and the heavy lifting that's going on, and I appreciate that. But still, I think there should be some legislative involvement. And then the other comment I want to make is when I look at this, what we've talked about today, and I look at our agenda, and kind of the one big thing that is going to have immediate negative impact, making this decision about higher education, with so much new information coming soon down the road. But I just want to point to Purdue, because what I heard was they have about $53 million in expenses coming this fall to get their campuses ready. They've lost already over $10 million in the spring. Take away the $17 million in federal funds that are eligible to replace that, there's still $35 million in the hole out of the gate. We're leaving them with $3 million less than a baseline, as opposed to the higher level they were expecting to get. And that's just what we know right now, and that's just one institution. We're learning later today, not before today, but later today, what the impact will be on K-12. So we don't have a full picture. We have a very small picture, and we're making a really big decision here. And I just wanted to share that. I think it's unfortunate that we're not waiting to get a little more information. It's been noted that there could be new flexibility with the federal dollars we already have. It's very likely, from what I see in the news, that there'll be more federal dollars coming. Some decisions do need to be made, but I think other big decisions that hurt education, and in particular will filter down to low-income students, inevitably, should have more consideration and more legislative engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Taylor?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple questions. First, Chris,
Yes.
you didn't bring up the direct funding to the city of Indianapolis. Did you just, was that like, you didn't want to focus on, or you just focused on what the state portion was?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask a question so I can clear this up for my colleagues. Did the city of Indianapolis get a direct payment from the COVID-19 fund?
Yes.
CARES Act?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did the state of Indiana, as a result of the city of Indianapolis, receive any funding?
No.
Okay. So here's my question. The way I read the regulation was that cities that have over 500,000 in population would receive a direct funding. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
However, of that direct funding, only 45% of what they per capita would have received actually goes directly to the city, and then the other 55% goes to the state. Am I correct about that?
I don't believe so.
I think you should look at the regulation.
Okay,
because
we'll look at it together.
Well, but this is the problem that I think everybody needs to look at. And Mr. Jackson, you might know this answer directly because don't you serve on OMB or someone of as your position? Okay.
He reports to me.
Yeah, this is my boss.
I didn't know because what I was told from the committee members is that 55% of what the city of Indianapolis would have received actually went to the state of Indiana. As a result, per capita, and the funding was per capita. Am I correct about that, Chris? The funding to the states was based on the number of people in the state.
Yes, to the states.
Right.
Then they said, so they allocated, they said 55% goes to the state. 45, up to 45% could go to communities that have a population in excess of 500,000. We only had one community to do that. That population, or their apportionment is still based on Indianapolis's relative percentage of population to the state of Indiana's.
Right.
There was no money taken away. I mean,
I didn't say take it away.
no, but it came to $168 million, that formula, and they've received that money.
Right, but was that 45% of what, okay.
Yeah.
I just need some clarification,
Okay.
if you could provide that in writing, because from what I'm understanding from the department, the U.S. Department that allocated these funds, that's how it worked.
Okay.
That 55% of what the city would have received went to the state of Indiana based on the population.
Okay.
And I was just, again, I was surprised because you didn't have the fact that we did have one city that had over 500,000.
Well, they're doing their own thing, which is
Right.
great.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows the city of Indianapolis actually helped the state of Indiana in the funding, is what I'm trying to make the points that you make me.
Senator Brown?
If I'm to understand, Mr. Johnson, your point about up to 55%, so if Indiana received $100, the state as an entity could not receive more than 55%, up to 45% of the $100 could go to those large population cities. Is that right? So if 100, up to 45%, $45 would be distributed to those large population cities. So they were trying to make sure that the state didn't receive it all because they'd have these large population centers. In our case, we only had one state. So it may be the Indiana portion was factored in to the total amount the state of Indiana was going to receive? Is that how it works? And only up to 45% could go to the states? They wanted to make sure the states didn't capture it all. So I don't think the way it's working is that anyone's percentage was being reduced. It sounds like the formula is such that they were just making the state as a whole would max out and not capture all of the large metropolitan areas.
So the total that Indiana received was $2.6 billion. Indiana. That was based on our relative population to the nation. That $2.6 billion could have been, if we had more Indianapolises that filled up the 45% bucket, could have been allocated to, I don't know, I can't do the math, but the split was 55% at a minimum goes to the state. 45% could go to locals if you had enough communities with a population in excess of of 500,000. We did not. We had one that qualified that said, you get money directly out of this, which will be cut right off the top of the $2.6 billion.
Right.
But that portion is based on Indianapolis's relative population. So whatever it is, 750,000 divided by 6.7 Hoosiers, 6.7 million Hoosiers,
Right.
equates to the $168 million.
Great. Representative Porter, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnston, on page 18, you have $50 million estimate for other support programs. Does that other support programs include day service providers? They have incurred a lot more expenses, in regards to residents, in regards to COVID. So are there any grant programs, or do you know?
No, that's specifically what those first two bullets are for the disabled and the aging day services.
So that will definitely go through those individuals of
Yep,
$50 million.
And FSSA has opened the application window for them to submit for.
And I read it, but the key is, what I understand, there's not it's an estimate of 50 million again.
Yeah.
So they can only get 100,000 throughout the state or whatever. So.
Well, if they exhaust the supply, we'll work with FSSA and see if we can allocate more money.
Okay,
But
that's
that
my
was based.
concern.
This is based on the estimates of FSSA working with those entities. right now to get started.
Okay.
To get started.
And Mr. Johnson, I just want to make sure that, because that estimate means, that EST is something else for me. So
Okay.
I can, you can estimate, $1 million and you may only spend $100, but it's an estimate. But I just want to make sure that one of the most vulnerable populations in our state are on the radar screen and will be taken care of in a meaningful, productive way. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Have I tired you out?
Just two things. One, I've received a few texts and emails. We'll try to get a copy of this presentation up on the Budget Agency website later today in our COVID-19 section on the website. And then secondly, just as Chris mentioned when he started, he was the $100 million requirement is still in effect until June 30th of this year. And he was addressing some of those specific things in his presentation, also just providing a larger update for Budget Committee. But I think just to be on the safe side, I would move that we amend the agenda to include the CDC grant as kind of 4D to just make sure that we've checked that box as far as reviewing that CDC grant with Budget Committee.
I should have been more specific there. That one I think, was awarded after the agenda was put together, and so that would exceed the threshold.
Thank you. So noted. Further questions? We have an agenda before the committee. Do we have a motion to accept?
Mr. Chairman, I do, can we have a little more discussion on I have some comments that I put together that I'd like to address. And I won't be long. My name is Gregory, so I won't tarry. And Mr. Johnson, well, he's gone, but I want to thank you guys and ladies and gentlemen for the conversations in regards to the CARES Act. As the chairman knows, about 6-8 weeks ago, I wrote a letter asking about our relationship from the Budget Committee in regards to the new committee that the governor had put together. And some of my colleagues have hit on it already, and I won't reiterate that. I believe that we need to be part of that. In other states, the legislative branch, no matter what party it is, has worked with the administrative branch in regards to COVID dollars coming to their states. And I just hope that we will continue to look at those dollars that we have, that we be full partners. Again, I think a year or so ago, we had a discussion, the Senator Missioner and I, in his Budget Committee. We talked about the $1 billion that went to the governor, and he did what he wanted to do with it, and we didn't like it. We weren't too happy about it, but again, here we are again in another silo in regards to that. So I just hope that as we continue to look at this situation, that I don't think it's too late for the State Budget Committee to exercise some meaningful oversight on the CARES Act funding. I mean, looking at that $1.9 billion of coronavirus relief funds that do remain. I think we need to have more transparency and accountability for the public. Putting things up on the website is fine after the fact, but how did we get here? I think some of the things that we need to look at as a Budget Committee is that we want to, again, be full partners as other states are in regards to accountability and transparency when it comes to those dollars being allocated. Like I said, other states have done that on numerous occasions. But thus far, to my dismay, we have not been involved as a legislature. Yes, they say it is a advisory committee, but I really hope that we can move beyond the advisory committee with those 7 or 8 individuals and bring on some legislative language in regards to those needs. I'm not criticizing how the money's being spent thus far, but what I am saying, I just think we need, as we receive these funds, that we work with some minimum information with the executive branch through press releases or information or whatever we're going to get out into the public. You know, the state budget agency, to me, is an agency that takes care of fiscal matters when the General Assembly isn't in. So, you know, this is a need that I think we need to continue. We play a very important role. And I don't think our role should be diminished by a subcommittee or another task force in regards to COVID-19. As we continue to work on this, there's going to be a lot of discussions around, and when the General Assembly is not in, I think the Budget Committee should step up, and we should do our job and be allowed to do our jobs when we're not in session. Going forward, I hope that we can continue to work on this. You know, I hope that they will embrace us and our wisdom that we have as a Budget Committee. I hope they will look at PPEs for K-12 education. I hope we would look at addressing existing budget shortfalls here in the state of Indiana. I hope that we will look at the dollars for township assistance that are not moving forward in a meaningful way right now, and K-12 PPE and the election costs. And we know what happened in Marion County. People waited 3 and 4 hours in line, went down from over 200 to 300 voting places down to 22. And we have a big election coming up in November. And look at the election costs. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot end this without talking about the disparities in regards to health care. And when we look at the 12 or 15% of the state population, and we have individuals who are dying, there are black and brown people that are dying because we are put essential workers, and we're exposed, the poor people are exposed. And so I think if we want to look at everything, just look at the holistic approach to everyone in our community, black and brown people, minority health costs, pre-existing conditions, things that the Black Caucus has worked on for years to try to put legislation, and it's fallen on deaf ear, or it's hit a brick wall. So I just hope that, you know, we continue to look at that and make sure that this is something that we can look at and address. And I'm gonna throw one more balloon out there, is that we gotta be careful about what's gonna happen. We're gonna have a tsunami when it comes to when it comes to eviction notices that's gonna come up probably at the end of the month. And that we're gonna have a lot of people that's gonna be out on the streets, and homeless is gonna be there, and we're gonna have mental health issues, and we have a bigger problem in the state of Indiana. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to take 3 to 5 minutes of our precious time today to give some concerns that we have as the Democrat caucus, and I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think you raise a great concern, and some of the issues related to the state that I've felt impacted is kind of the rural urban environment that we're creating in our state. The urban areas where populations are greater have much greater impact of the communicable diseases, have much greater impact of the housing issues than kind of in the rural area where people are spread out. So it is a big issue. The state is very diverse about that going forward. Thank you. Thank you, Green. With that, we have an agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda? It's been moved and seconded, set the agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay. The agenda is adopted. Just for your information, tentatively dates coming up for the Budget Committee are August 4th, September 15th, and November 18th. Those are all dates that are tentative right now, and at the present time, they're planned to be here in Indianapolis. Don't know if they'll be here at the Government Center or where, but will be a single-day session. September 15th, August 4th, September 15th, November 18th. Right now, those are the tentative dates. So put those on your calendar. I appreciate everybody's discussion. And so Karen, I hope we answered about school funding going forward. both Senator Mishler and I feel, you know, if you contact that public school, you're a public school ADM.
Yeah, right, give ourselves permission later.
Yeah.
You have to do that
Right,
since
yeah.
we're not here now.
We are adjourned, thank you.
Hey, Ben, I'm sorry.